Good afternoon. I call to order the meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for July 24th, 2023. Our first order of business is approval of the agenda. The only minor change to the agenda is we will have time for public comment after the employee recognition. If there's no objections, we can move on. Right, next, we're moving on to approval of the July 20th, 2023 Transportation Committee meeting minutes. Did anyone have any changes or additions? Okay. Seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the July 10th.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Carter. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Carter. First Tony, second Tyrone. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And the motion carries. And now we are on to employee recognition. And we turn it over to General Manager Leslie Canaris.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Today, we are bringing forward someone who we'd like to commend not only for performing their regular work exceptionally, but for going above and beyond in support of our annual bus rodeo. But before we get to that, I want to acknowledge the operators who recently earned top spots in our competition and went on to the state competition that was held in Rochester over this past weekend. As you can see on the screen, we had 4 operators who participated this weekend. They placed 3rd, 4th, 6th, and 12th out of the 17 competitors. And early next year, we'll also be sending our top finisher to APTA's international competition. Notably, this operator, Jean, is the first female who's won our rodeo and gone on to represent us at APTA's international rodeo. I'll also mention that top finishing operators from this year's rodeo have received trophies and will be invited to the Metropolitan Council's employee recognition event later this year. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Annette to introduce the person we're honoring today.
Hello, and thank you all for allowing us to spend a few minutes to recognize Doug Luyan for his efforts in the rodeo. Doug is a safety specialist at the East Metro Garage, and he promotes safety for the bus operators and other staff throughout the garage. Doug has done a lot of work with the rodeo. The Metro Transit rodeo that we had this year was at MJR Rooter Garage, which was a challenge for us because it was a new location. So it was up to Doug to create a whole new course, to map it all out and do that. So he did extensive work with the rodeo, which was greatly appreciated, all the time he put in with that. Let's see, Doug is also a member of the State Rodeo Committee, the MPTA, Minnesota Public Transportation Committee. So he's on that committee, and he helps with the state rodeo, which are operators that went to. So he was there judging this past weekend with the operators. So I also want to say that Doug is he's a very dedicated employee. He goes above and beyond, which is awesome to have an employee like that. So he really made everything work out well for us. So we appreciate him much. And I think Doug wants to mention a few words.
Okay. I just want to say thank you. I'm honored for being recognized. I just consider to be fortunate to help develop our bus operators with the goal of public safety, just to mentor them. And as far as the rodeo, it's there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm just a part of that and get to watch a group develop our bus operators, and so I consider it a privilege, and so thank you.
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for what you do. Congratulations. Thank you.
Next to the wall, right here. With the backpack and the purple shirt.
And best of luck to our operators. They continue to the international one. Next, we are on to our public comment, and I will try and get all the names right, but I know we're starting with Ryan Timlin from ATU.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me speak this evening. My name is Ryan Timlin, President of ATU Local 1005. The members of our union operate and maintain the Metro Transit bus and train facilities. Trains and the facilities. I want to start by saying that I think it is a hopeful time for transit, thanks to the legislature passing around $400 million of new funding for the transit system next year and each year coming here forward. We have a great opportunity to create the public transit system riders and workers deserve. Unfortunately, I am here with our members today because this funding is at risk of being wasted at this time for putting it towards frontline employees to expand the system even further and make it more reliable. I've seen the labor crisis worsen here for years, and it wasn't just the pandemic. There was a crisis hiring before the pandemic. The numbers of Metro Transit bus operators has been decreasing, and the driver shortage has been increased since before COVID. That's expanded into maintenance. We're short in the maintenance divisions. We're short in the facilities divisions. Every division, we are short employees. The sharpest example is the operators. Turnover among operators has increased rapidly, like I said, before COVID, and is what has been continuing since this process. One sharp, significant statistic, though, that I think needs to be brought up is while we are struggling to hire frontline employees, since 2012, the number of managers and supervisors has actually increased roughly about 50% in that same period. Simply improving hiring for frontline employees, as I know this committee talks about regularly, is just not going to be enough. We're losing too many people. We have kept the experiences, and we have to keep the experienced and trained staff we already have. We can't expand the system without their knowledge and skill. The ATU Local 1005 contract expires on August 1st. We are demanding cost of living wage adjustment to be returned to our contract as they were during high inflation days of the 80s. Putting COLA in the contract is the kind of investment that lets workers know that despite high inflation now and unprecedented inflation in the future, they have a job they can count on to keep up with that inflation. With new funding, big plans, and labor crisis already worsening, this is no time for what would amount to a pay cut if raises are less than inflation. It would be a slap in the face to the very workforce that Metro Transit needs to keep. Along with this, there are many other issues that are developing, and some will speak about it. Just some of the things I'd like to touch on is the drug testing process needs to be checked. There are too many of our members, because the procedures are not being followed properly right now, are ending up in SAP, which is the drug treatment process after a supposed failed test, when they actually have not had failed tests. Also, we'll have some helpers speak about the crisis that's developing in the light rail helper division right now, where they're all being moved to third shift, which this is going to create a crisis for their family and accelerate a job loss within this workforce itself. Not only that, a number of safety issues need to be brought up on light rail, specifically to the track maintenance crews. We are lucky today we're sitting here without a death, actually, because communication between RCC and the ATU workforce is not happening properly. And a few months ago, thankfully, it was caught in time at the last second, but thankfully it was caught at the last second. We are not sitting here with one of our ATU members dead. And so I'm raising these issues to you, to the council. There's a number of major issues that need to be addressed, but also the contract. We need to address these issues to make sure we have a long-standing workforce and sustainable workforce. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will call everyone off, and Ryan did a great job of this because he's testified before us before. If you can state your name and affiliation when you come up and keep your comments to about 3 minutes, that would be great. The next one we have is Devin Duro. I hope I got that right.
Thank you for allowing me to speak in front of all of you today. I think for me, the biggest issue is, I'd been on medication for ADHD to help me stay focused on my job and whatnot. And a couple years ago, there was a medical review officer that decided to not take my medication, even though I'd been on it for a few years, and I had had prior tests before that on the same medication that they had cleared. So I asked him, well, that's strange because I had had other tests before and you've cleared them without any safety risks, and he, ignored it and whatnot. And then I was put through the SAP process like Ryan was talking about earlier. When they interviewed me, he had stated to me directly that I knew within 5 minutes that you didn't have a problem. He had been a 30-year, SAP, so he knows what to look for and whatnot. And so, and he disagreed with the medical review officer, but the biggest issue is, for me, is that when these medical review officers and these DOT personnel make a bad decision, regardless of other professionals speaking against it, it would be really nice to have an employer that would have your back and not necessarily just look at the black and white on paper, but hear what the people have to say, and just really hear them and say, hey, we think there was a mistake here, and this needs to be addressed. But 6 months later, after I had went through all that, been cleared, I was terminated over the phone. Never given a meeting, never given any union representation. I was just told to hand in my badge and uniforms, and that was it. Now, almost a year and a half later, we won the arbitration, and I'm back to work now. But I still have to go through, had to go through the SAP process again, observed drug testing on top of the random drug testing, all for an addiction that I don't have, that professionals have said I don't have, and yet I'm being treated like I do. And so that's the biggest issue I want to bring up, is just to have an employer that advocates for you, even if there is a bad call being made. So I thank you guys again for hearing me and letting me speak.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we have Abdi Adouli.
Good afternoon, Chamber. My name is Abdulrazak Abdullah. I am a Metro Transit employee for 19 years. Last year, they pulled me a random drug test, and I was fasting. I won't be able to produce enough specimen or enough urine. So the second procedure was to send me a professional medical doctor to do some blood count or to do different way. At that time, the manager was the new manager. I didn't get the union representative. So they sent me home. The next morning, they sent me a medical to review. I had a blood count, urine test, physical checkup. Everything became negative. They called me in the office, so they gave me 5 weeks suspended without pay. They sent me food and alcohol and drug classes. They put me 6 years probation to do a random drug test at least once a month, or sometimes I get twice a month. And that incident was happened July 5th, 2022. This year every Muslim we fast once a year. They call the Ramadan. Maybe you guys notice. So the ATU, they wrote an official letter to Metro Transit, every Muslim employee to get a commendation from sunrise to the sunset. Because we can't eat, we can't drink, we dehydrate. So they sent a letter my 5th days I was fasting this year during the Ramadan, they pulled me another drug test. They didn't give us any accommodation. So if I fail, straight up be determined. That's my last option. So I break my fast. I drink water. I wait at least 2.5 hours. Luckily, I produce enough specimen. Every month, I've been doing random drug tests. That's the harassment. That's the religion discrimination. And I don't deserve that. And other co-workers. And thank you for your listening. That's all I had today. We have to do something. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next one we have is Nicholas Benti.
Good afternoon. My name is Lakeelish Benti, and I work for Lightload Helper for 6 years. And now they trying to change our shift to overnight shift. We used to work 2 shifts, day shift and second shift, and now they trying to change that shift and to inside the building to clean the trains. And everybody has a different situation. For example, my husband worked 2 jobs, second shift and overnight shift, and now when we pick a shift, I become second shift with my seniority. So that way I don't have anybody to pick up my kids from school or to take care of, to watch my kids. And it need to be fixed, this one. I don't know why they do that. We try to tell them, but they're not gonna fix it. And they didn't even hire like almost 4 or 5 months since they hired 2 people. The last person they didn't hire. If they take them that long to hire, I don't know how long it's gonna take them to hire, and we can go to platform, get our position again. And that's all I want to talk. Thank you. Have a
All
nice
right,
day.
thank you. Next, we're on to Lynn Bashro. Pardon me.
Hi, my name is Lynn Vashro. I own Otter Saloon over Northeast Minneapolis, and this is my friend Kristen. She works there as well. And this is about the F-line bus line that wants to go in, and they want to put a shelter outside of Otter Saloon, right outside my front door, where it will take away the parking along the side of my building, the metered parking. In that area, parking is already a struggle, and we're losing parking across the street on First Street due to the bike lane being put in. So if the F-line comes in, they're going to take away the rest of the parking on the central side as well. We understand that there are many meters in the area, but a lot of my morning customers are handicapped and rely on that parking by the building on First and 7th and Central. The bus shelter placement may also bring unwanted foot traffic, extra foot traffic that's not beneficial to our business. Examples would be people using our bathrooms. How do we police that? We don't have extra employees that I can put on to help with that. People using our bathrooms to wash themselves, do drugs, or possibly sell them with this bus stop coming in. People hanging out in front of our door, bothering customers, asking for money or cigarettes or something. People coming in to get out of the cold and the heat. It's just difficult. It's difficult. The bike path came first, and I was open to them. I didn't fight that. They have an easement. They needed a piece of my sidewalk. I agreed to it. I'm doing that. It's just the bus stop is an issue, being right there outside my front door. So I just ask that another area be considered. I have talked to somebody, Nasser and Jake from Metro Transit, about these concerns. There's always businesses nearby that have parking lots that you know, maybe a bus stop could go there, down half a block outside of Ray J's, or just across the street from us is the Banks building that has a parking lot. So taking a spot over there for a bus stop would be better. Do you have anything to add?
Just that our customers, I mean, we had a petition signed from our customers because like she said, a lot of them are older and a lot of them just don't have placement to put their vehicle. A lot of them said they're not gonna come because they have to walk a couple of blocks and they're not able to do that. And it's mostly a lot of our regulars in the morning and, you know, we just don't have a lot of room or space. And now especially we just don't, once that little area is gone with the bike path, we basically have no parking, so.
Except what's up on the building
And,
side.
you know, she's been there for 15 years and it's a historic building and it's just sad if it ends up going out of business if we don't have places for our customers to park. So,
Yep, I'm trying to maintain and keep the 7 employees I have with jobs.
so
So anyway, thank you for
thank
listening.
you so
That's what
much,
I wanted to say.
appreciate it.
Thank you all. And then we have Charlene. It's thank you. I was gonna try and muscle through it and get it right.
No problem.
Welcome.
I'm Charlene DeFerrari. I'm here advocating for my son, adult son that has a disability that's nonverbal, concerning Metro Mobility ridership. And I've been at the council before when Charlie Zelli was chair with Nero's PCA currently that was riding with him. Now I am the PCA and his legal guardian, his guardianship. And we've been having a lot of complaints regarding his safety on their ridership, regarding their service, and the prior time I was here at the hearing, we had devised a plan with Andy Streisick about the formal complaint being filed against Metro Mobility. Previously, I was calling Metro Mobility thinking that these complaints were being addressed. But with coming to the hearing, Andy told me that to have an official complaint, you need to notify Met Council. So we devised a plan that I will forward my complaints to Andy Streisick. This was prior COVID. So after COVID, we started, you know, ridership increased, and we've been having more complaints, serious complaints, drivers stopping on the highway to take a ride, failure to arrive at the pickup, over 2-hour delay, stranded in certain locations. And I have been complaining via email to Andy since, I believe, January. And the last recent was a safety issue that I needed to call him, and he was out of the office, and I called his immediate supervisor, Christine Kanukin, and she looked in the system. She said, well, Charlene, I don't see any complaints since 2020. And I said, how can that be? I have email documentation. So these are the numerous email documentations that Annie and I have communicated with, and I forwarded to Christine, and she said she would address that when he returns from vacation. So Andy Streisick said that he was forwarding it to Metro Mobility. I said, well, why did you do that? Because we already agreed that they were not researching the problem, that Metro Council will officially enter the complaints in the system and address them. But he was not entering them in the system. He was forwarding them to Metro Mobility, which is my source of complaint. And there's numerous complaints, so I only have 3 minutes, so I did leave copies, so hopefully you will read them because they are severe. And my son relies on this transportation. He's vulnerable, and they should not be subjected to that type of treatment. So these are the complaints. They can be verified with his immediate supervisor, Christine, and if you can read through them, I would like a feedback and a kind of resolution on these complaints, because they are serious. We have a driver stopping on the highway on 252, going northbound on 252 off the off-ramp of 694, and veering to the left to pick up a passenger with horns just blaring. That's dangerous. And there was another rider on the bus, and she can verify this. And it's just numerous failure to pick us up, delays, 2 hours, waiting, stranded I think it was last Wednesday. We were supposed to get a 4:48 p.m. They didn't pick us up till 6:35. And of course, we have no vehicle to pick us up, so we're just literally stranded until we get service. So it's really severe. My son shouldn't have to suffer because he relies on this ADA ridership program. So I was hoping there's a solution. I don't know if there's any financial penalty. You subsidize them, so I'm hoping something can be put in effect.
But we will make sure that the complaints get sent over to the right people, and make sure they get seen. So we'll start there, and we'll make sure Charles his group gets in touch.
You would send it not to Metro Mobility, hopefully.
Metropolitan Transportation Services is a group within council, and they oversee Metro Mobility. So we'll take it to a different one.
And will I get any feedback of the resolutions
Yes,
of
you
these
will.
complaints?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and that ends our public comment unless there's anybody else who wanted to comment. Welcome. If you want to come up, make sure we get your name, because.
Can I leave these here? Will you? Yep.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
My name is Brendan Viewley. I'm one of the owners of Francis Burger Joint. We're a new restaurant at the corner of Central and Lowry, Northeast.
I'm going to pause. Just what was your last name?
Viewley, V as in Victor, I-E-L-E.
All right.
Thanks a lot for hearing my comments.
Yeah, no problem.
So I'm here for the same reason as Otters, to express concern about the placement of a bus shelter. So we're kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum of them, where they've been there for 15 years. We're 6 months into a 7-year lease there, with the option for 2 more. So we're planning to be in the neighborhood for a really long time. One of the drawing points that brought us to that building are these big, beautiful windows that open up from our restaurant area onto the street, and then some patio seating that we have out there. And we do appreciate Jake and Nasser coming in and hearing our concerns. And I think we got to the table kind of too late because of the fact that we're so new there to really have any of our concerns heard in the process of when they were speaking with neighbors and things. And so, same as Otters, where I that little strip of Central there is just restaurant after restaurant. It's Taco Riendo, Chorrito Lindo. There's a bakery right next door to us, just right down the street. That's restaurant after restaurant, and I sit and watch all day long. People park out in front of those streets and go in and take takeout, and it really is. While we are extremely pro transit and we're really excited about the F line, if that bus station could remain where it is with the 10 function on the north side of Lowry Avenue, and just keep those areas open for the very small amount of parking that is available for our businesses and for Francis. It would just be really helpful for us. And additionally to that, the light and the way having a bus pull up every 10 minutes right in front of those, we weren't even, Jake couldn't even assure us, and understandably so, that we would even be able to keep any patio seating there, which is about 10% of our seating capacity during the summer months. So it's a really considerable portion of possible income, and everybody knows how important that is in Minnesota to have that period of time. And so, yeah, I'm just here respectfully to ask that. I know it sounded to me like it was pretty well certain that was going to be the recommendation for the location of the shelter, and we said that we would follow up with every opportunity possible, and it sounded like this was to make our concerns heard, and sounds like this was really one of the only ones that we did have because of the fact that we didn't really have a chance to have our concerns heard in the lead up to this because of the timing of our opening. So if you would just consider keeping it where it is. We think that the businesses that are on the north side of Lowry there are just a lot more symbiotic to where that bus stop is. There's a bike shop. There's a furniture store that has most of its windows that are covered in displays and things. So there's no issue having a shelter outside of that business, as far as I can tell. Whereas it's it's really important to us to have that parking. It's really important to us to have the visibility and the level of, and just those few patio seats that we do have. So, yeah, thanks a lot for hearing me today.
Thank you. Final call, if anyone else has any comments? All right, thank you to all the public commenters tonight. And we go on to reports now, and our first report is Metropolitan Transportation Services, Director Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, council members. Contracted service update. Hot weather this week prompts some additional care and caution for our workforce as well as our riders. We don't anticipate any changes or disruptions in service as we might for snowy weather, but we will take extra measures of caution as we're delivering service. On the finance front, the motor vehicle sales tax continues to outperform forecasts in 2023. June receipts totaled 104.5% of forecast, and we're at 108% of forecast for the year. So good news there. And then finally, on the planning front, we continue our work on the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan with an advisory work group meeting that reviewed a lot of the content that you received at your last meeting and discussion. A lot of the feedback from the advisory work group was on the same themes that we've heard both from our technical work groups as well as from the Transportation Committee members. Climate topics in relation to resiliency across categories, as well as interest in predictable and reliable travel, although not necessarily faster travel when driving, but a greater degree of predictability when folks are making trips. Were common themes in the discussion last week. So good discussion, and work will continue as we finalize goals and objectives and advance other aspects of the plan. With that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Charles? All right, then we're on to General Manager Leslie Kinderas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Given the length of the agenda, I won't really give much of a report, but I will just note that at your next meeting, we plan to bring as one of our information items our quarterly service changes and workforce update, and we'll include an update on state fair service at that time too. So our next quarterly service changes do go into effect August 19th, and your next meeting is August 14th. So if you're getting questions before then or want more information, please don't hesitate to reach out. But with that, Madam Chair, I'd take any questions.
Any questions or comments from council members? We'll go on to our tab report. Peter
Thank you,
McGinn
Madam
is here
Chair,
tonight.
Madam Vice Chair, honorable committee members. Again, following the general manager's and Mr. Carlson's tenor, I will keep this very short. At the tab, as noted in the tab summary report, there were two items that came up. One is, I want to put out there kind of as a public service, is the concerns expressed by MnDOT about the way people are driving, particularly in construction zones, and high speeds and disrespect, and, you know, that not very Minnesotan. The main topic that I will say anecdotally, my wife and I have noticed that as well, unfortunately. The main topic at the tab was the how to allocate or to spend the new funding from the active transportation sales tax. And it's in addition to what's reported, it's unlikely that will be officially in the 2024 regional solicitation, most likely 2026. The meaning of geographic equity will be researched. Is that the same as geographic balance, which, as you know, is the balance of trying to accommodate all 7 counties and the cities with equity? And then under Director Carlson's, I thought was a great suggestion, was to add the 3 additional requirements enacted by the state legislature for receiving these funds, add those to the regional solicitation so that in the event that we have projects that are unfunded in the 2024 regional solicitation, we would have the ability to go to that money and fund them. The 3 additional regulations, and I defer to Mr. Carlson and of course Chair Barber, will not be there, but there may be a process of allocating additional money from we'll have about 24 million. And anecdotally, this would be my 6th regional solicitation, and I've never seen us not fund afterwards. It just always happens. And then probably the last, not probably, the last element that I thought was discussed with some controversy was whether to make this money available at 100%. In other words, no local match. Under the regional solicitation, it's an 80%, 80-20, so 80 federal, 20, and there were many opinions on whether it should be 100% for the local communities or not. Thank you. I certainly stand for any questions. But if they get too hard, I've got my, I've got the brain trust up there.
It was a slightly complicated meeting.
Yes.
Yes. Any questions or comments from council members? All right, thank you, Peter. Appreciate
Thank you,
that. That we're moving on to, there are no items on our consent agenda tonight, so we're moving to non-consent business. The first business item is business item 2023-134, which is the Metro F line, the approval of the final quarter plan. We have Jake Knight here to present. And Kyle, sorry.
Good afternoon, Chair, council members. My name is Kyle O'Donnell Burrows. I'm the planning manager for arterial BRT at Metro Transit. I use he, him pronouns. And I'm here today with Jake Knight, who's a senior planner on our team and is the planning lead for the F line. And he is going to present this item here today.
Good afternoon. As Kyle said, my name is Jake Knight. I'm a senior planner in the arterial BRT group. And I use he, him pronouns. You can call me Jake. Proposed action 2023-134 is that the Metropolitan Council approve the Metro F-Line final corridor plan to establish the number and location of stations included in the project. This final corridor plan is the third version of the corridor plan. We previously came to this body for our draft corridor plan as well as our recommended corridor plan. Each had a public comment period associated with it. On the screen here is our planned project schedule. The council acted on the alignment of the F-line in early 2021. Since that time, we've been working with community and our agency partners to establish station locations. And as I said earlier, we came to Transportation Committee with our draft corridor plan in October of 2022, collected feedback over a month-long public comment period at that time, and incorporated it into a recommended corridor plan, which we brought in front of committee in April of this year. We incorporated that feedback into our final corridor plan, which is in front of us today. As you heard a few weeks ago, we are transitioning from the planning phase of the F-line into the engineering phase. And associated with that is increased coordination with MnDOT and potential projects on Central Avenue or Trunk Highway 65. Working closely with MnDOT to make sure that we're aligning our projects and providing an efficient process and the best possible outcome. We're headed towards the beginning of construction in 2025. So the corridor plan itself is our process and document to establish station locations for the F-line and inform the design. The corridor plan focuses on station intersections, and within those intersections, the quadrants or corners of the intersection where platforms will be located. You can think about a platform as where you could catch the bus or where you can get off the bus. Importantly, our corridor plan is really our policy basis for staff to take into the engineering and design phase of our project, where we identify the specific placement of platforms. We get down to feet and inches, whereas at this corridor plan level, we're really focused on quadrants and corners. And again, this is this provides us with confidence moving into that next phase of our project. And as I said earlier, this is the third version following 2 public comment periods. Shown here on the screen are the many different activities that we have used to spread the word about the F-line project and gather input and feedback on our corridor plan. We've really focused on trying to be out in community, meeting folks where they're at. We've posted materials at bus stops, we've been at libraries, at community meetings, sent out multiple rounds of postcards, many rounds of email notifications, working very closely with our agency partners to use their networks to spread the word, and importantly, translating our vital materials into documents spoken by the folks who live in our corridor. We collected feedback and comments over our 2 public comment periods through survey, email, and phone comments. Of the survey respondents, we were able to collect some demographic information. And I'm happy to report that most of the 425 respondents to our survey live in zip codes that are near the F-line corridor. The majority of our respondents use Metro Transit at least a few times per month, and about half use it a few times per week. The majority of our respondents were white, 78%, whereas based on more extensive surveys of the existing Route 10, which would be substantially replaced by the F-line, Route 10 riders are about half people of color. And I'll share that in our survey, the majority of those respondents come from lower income households. Our survey, our second survey during the second public comment period was more representative than the survey associated with our first public comment period. And I think that marks progress and is, in looking back at past data and other surveys, this is our most representative effort. With that said, I think it's really incumbent upon us to continue to improve. This is an area where we're focused on making sure that we're hearing from folks who are on the line and in the corridor and who are fully representative of our riders and customers. A little bit about what we heard from those folks. Folks, again, could comment via survey, email, or phone, as well as some in-person options that we then incorporated into our survey count. We received just over 850 comments, and about 70% of those were in support of the plan. As we heard a bit earlier, we did receive a 205 signature petition in opposition to the proposed station at Central and First Avenue / 7th Street. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more in the following slides. Some of the key themes that we heard in the hundreds of comments that we received were support for bus priority treatments and ways to improve speed and reliability in the corridor. Excitement about improved station amenities and increased maintenance that comes with being part of the Metro network. Excitement about access to destinations in this really rich and important corridor in our communities. We did hear some concerns about on-street parking and the proximity to existing businesses, as well as some concerns about access to transit for seniors and for folks with limited mobility. I'll talk about how we've responded to some of those concerns in the coming slides. The graph on the right shows the number of comments we received by station location, with the length of the bar indicating stations with a greater number of comments. The color also indicates support or opposition, where the color blue is comments in support of the proposed station location in the corridor plan, and yellow indicating opposition or requesting a change. And I will talk about some of these high interest station locations now. So we read and applied sentiment and themes to each of the 800 or so comments that we received. And the most the stations with the most number of comments in opposition or with concern raised were really centered on 3 stations, those being at Central and 1st Avenue / 7th Street, Central and 18th Avenue, and Central and Lowry. Again, we responded to those concerns in the recommended and/or the final corridor plan and conducted additional analysis at these station locations, making sure that we didn't miss something in our first or second pass. Based on this feedback and that additional analysis, we are recommending changes to 1 station location. The station at Central and 18th Avenue, which was previously recommended in the recommended corridor plan, we are recommending a change in this final corridor plan. Also, just briefly take a moment to bring to the attention of the committee that, as you may have heard, City of Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry indicated interest in pedestrianizing Nicollet Mall. As you can see on the map to the right here, the southern portion of the F-line uses Nicollet Mall and existing facilities on the mall that exist today. We are working with the City of Minneapolis to explore alternatives to transit corridors in downtown Minneapolis, and working very closely with them to understand any alternatives and the impacts that could come about as a result of that change. Should Nicollet Mall proceed as a pedestrian-only zone, we would refine and make changes to the F-line alignment and associated stations and bring that back to this committee in an amended corridor plan. Now I'd like to speak in a little bit more detail to some of these high-interest stations. So the first being here at Central and 1st Avenue / 7th Street. Again, this is the location where Otter Saloon, as we heard earlier, organized a petition specifically regarding the southbound platform. We also heard some concerns from Terrarium Recording Studio, which is just south of Otter Saloon, and both front Central Avenue. Some of the concerns that we heard were regarding on-street parking. At this early phase in the project, we estimate a total of 3 to 5 existing on-street parking spaces would be impacted by the southbound platform. And that 3 to 5 represents about a 5 to 10% of the existing spaces within a 2-minute walk or roll of the intersection. We also heard a bit from these stakeholders about the placement of shelter and platforms in front of a business or building. I think it's really important to understand in this context, we are trying to provide an enhanced service and better product for our customers in a corridor that is completely developed. There are businesses along much of the stretch, and in many instances, there are not opportunities to place a platform that is not in front of an existing structure. We did hear from specific to Terrarium Recording Studio some concerns about the noise produced by buses. In response to this, we looked at the Federal Transit Administration's guidance on noise and vibration, and we believe that the F-line and the proposed station at this intersection would not produce noise in a significant way that isn't already present in this very busy corridor, which is, again, already served by Route 10. We met with both of these stakeholders multiple times. We met with them and communicated with them multiple times. And importantly, in response to some of this feedback, we did look at alternative locations. And both of those alternative locations present safety issues that we are not comfortable recommending at this time. specifically because of those safety concerns. This station was, our recommendations were developed with feedback from the City of Minneapolis, MnDOT, as well as Hennepin County and our other partners. And so for those reasons, we believe that the proposed southbound location really best meets the project goals. And that's that's why we're recommending it today. Our second location at Central and Lowry, specifically the southbound platform, we heard some concerns from Francis Burger Joint, as well as Durango Bakery. So throughout both public comment periods, my colleague Nasser visited both of these properties twice and spoke with folks both of those times. We sent out postcards to both the physical location of businesses as well as the location of the tax address. So if someone owned the building that didn't reside or got mail at a different location, they also received notification. And had a chance to meet with both of these stakeholders and talk about those concerns in a little bit more detail. Some of the concerns raised, as we heard a bit earlier, were regarding placement of the shelter in front of windows and cafe seating. Again, we're in a very constrained and built-up environment with a lot of businesses and great community destinations and places where folks want to be. And the success of our project is in part on our stations being where folks want to be, so they can have access to these places. And this is a really important part of the broader community and the corridor. Specific to cafe seating, the City of Minneapolis dictates the ability to have cafe seating in the right-of-way. We, similar to all of the other station locations, coordinated with the city throughout this process, and they have expressed support for all of our recommendations, including this platform location. We heard some concern about the loss of on-street parking. Again, at this early phase, we estimate the impact would be between 4 to 6 total on-street parking spaces, representing about 7 to 10% of on-street parking within a 2-minute walk or roll of the intersection. If we were to go beyond that 2 minutes to say 5 minutes, we're talking about hundreds of additional parking spaces from whether on-street or off-street lots. We looked at alternative location, specifically on the northern leg of the intersection, that location, that alternative location, presents similar parking impacts. It is similarly adjacent to existing businesses, but it does not support the speed and reliability goals of our project, and does not serve our customers in a way that that we think we should be serving them. Next, I want to talk about Central and 18th Avenue. Again, we are recommending a shift north to Central and 18½ Avenue. We heard a lot from Route 10 riders and residents in this neighborhood about concerns for access to transit for folks who might be older or who may have limited mobility. A really important destination in this part of the corridor is Parker Skyview. This is a 25-story Minneapolis Public Housing Authority building, specifically for seniors. It's also a source of a lot of ridership on the existing Route 10. And we had previously recommended a platform at 18th Avenue, but heard from residents that there wasn't good internal building circulation that would allow folks to access 18th Avenue very easily. And so we took that feedback, gathered additional information and found out that the truly accessible location at the building that was available throughout the day during the times when the F-line would operate is on the northern end of the building. And so in response to that, we are recommending that shift north to 18½ Avenue to better serve these customers and in response to that feedback. So again, proposed action 2023-134 is that the Metropolitan Council approve the Metro F-line corridor plan to establish the number and location of stations included in the project. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm really appreciative of all the public engagement that had to go into this project. A lot of stops and a very needed corridor service that we're providing. But I do have some questions about the 1st Avenue and 7th stop. If this action gets approved, do we have a plan to monitor that stop or have any mitigation if there are problems based on what the concerns are?
So, yes, specifically, as we transition into the engineering phase, again, once we get down to actual feet and inches, it's at that time where we'll truly understand the impact, should there be any, of this southbound platform location. And so at that time, we will certainly try to mitigate any potential impacts and work with the stakeholders that we have heard from, as well as others, to see if we can design the platform in such a way that doesn't present any potential impacts. I'd say generally it is not within the sort of scope of our projects to conduct a demand parking analysis or do sort of a before and after. We are confident that the F-line providing better access to this location will serve customers of the businesses we heard from today, as well as the broader community, and provide benefit that outweighs that parking impact.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. And I understand with so many stops with the F-line, as was stated, there are, and looking at equity and how we handle the different stops with so many businesses along. So everyone is somewhat sharing in the burden and also the benefits. I do have a question on the cafe parking off of Central and Lowry. Yeah, so I have a question about, are there other outside cafe seating along that block between Francis and Durango, for example, or to the end of the block?
Chair Barber, Councilmember, I can't say for certain, but I don't believe there is other cafe seating on that western side of Central Avenue on this block. So we have, the building on the corner is a retail location. It's a small tax service. Francis and Durango, to my knowledge, Durango does not have cafe seating. There are a few additional restaurants south of Durango, which again, I don't believe have cafe seating.
So did you look at, potentially, I guess I have a sensitivity to a new business and having that new business be successful. I know they may have kind of come in late in the game and didn't get a chance to be a part of the early public comments, but I just think that, you know, we want to make sure that if there's a possibility for us to be supportive of helping a small business be successful, and there's a way to mitigate, I would be in favor of maybe looking at having it move further south based on what we're looking at south. And seeing if that's a possibility. Because if I loved cafe seating personally, and the view is very important for cafe seating. So if it's possible to kind of shift that station location down a bit, it looks like it should not be a safety issue like some of the other areas. To do that, I'd like to see if that can be done. And I don't know if that would require, I mean, I'm very hesitant to making changes because of the multiple impacts for businesses along that corridor. But if it's a very simple modification, is it possible? I don't know.
I just want to add one comment. Also, know that as part of this project, we're working with MnDOT Minneapolis to design the pedestrian realm as they redo Central. So there's multiple layers of this project where all these things can be factored in along the way.
Madam Chair, council members, if I might expand a little bit on the answer there too. I think, you know, one of the things we'll be continuing to do in the engineering phase of this project is refining the design of this platform and looking for ways to mitigate the concerns raised by this stakeholder and others, including, you know, looking and exploring at the ways to retain cafe seating. I will note too at this intersection, in addition to the, you know, the importance of this commercial node, one of the reasons we want to be so close to this intersection is it is an existing transfer location for the Route 32, which is an important east-west transfer location, and on our list of 2040 priorities for future arterial BRT expansion as well, the Lowry Avenue corridor. So wanting to be as close as we can to this intersection to preserve those transfers is another important part of our considerations here.
Chair, Councilmember, if I could also just add on to that, you know, in response to some concerns we've heard about visibility in the past, you know, it is part of our standard shelter design now to use clear glass and try to maintain that visibility from the street to existing businesses.
Yeah, and that may conflict with the view of a cafe. I mean, if, for example, you were to put something more decorative for people to look at as they're sitting out there, but then that doesn't allow the visibility into the shelter. So I know it gets complicated, and I'm glad that there are some other phases where things can be looked at a little bit closer.
All right, Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I share Councilmember Chambliss's concerns about both the Otter Saloon and Francis, the Francis Burger Joint. As the granddaughter of a guy who started a small business 100 years ago this year in a little town in southeastern Minnesota, I have a special sensitivity to small businesses. And while the loss of spaces for Otters may be 3 to 5 total, in addition, they lost spaces when the bike path was put in, and they supported the bike path. So it feels like they're kind of getting surrounded by transit development that it could very seriously impact their business. And the same is true for Francis, and I share Councilmember Chambliss's desire to help Francis have a good first year. The other concern I have is when we talk about a 2-minute walk or roll, that may not seem like a long walk or roll, but for folks with aging or disability issues, and particularly during that charming season we call winter in Minnesota, that can run close to 6 months some years, that 2-minute walk or roll is going to feel and be a lot longer and a lot more difficult. And as the restaurant, the Otter Saloon owner indicated, they worry about losing customers as a result, and I share that concern for them. So I don't know if anything can happen here tonight or in the not too distant future. And I understand that we're working in collaboration with the city and MnDOT, but I would hope that in the future, we can watch out for small businesses and really help sustain them. Business development is a big part of the work we are to be doing. And I get concerned when our projects kind of clash. These business owners are our customers as well, and hopefully they and their employees will consider ridership on our systems once they're developed. But I think maintaining a good relationship with them throughout the development, the construction, and the maintenance of these systems is really, really important. So I appreciate the work that you're doing on it. I know it's not easy finding places, but on behalf of small businesses, I just ask that we work really, really extra hard.
Thank you, Councilmember Vento, and I'll add on to that. This is one area that I think our ABRT team really excels at. I think they've changed how we do this and being out in the communities, talking to the businesses all the way through, making sure things reflect the communities, that it makes sense. Like you said, what does the station look at that is a view? What is that for that business owner, for that community? And they've done a really nice job of it. I think they kind of set the model for the rest of council. So, but it's not this isn't for the business owners, even if this should proceed, this isn't the end of the conversation. This is just a step along the conversation. So I just want to make sure that you know that, and that we know that too. Like you've talked about the good experiences you've had with Nassar and Jake, and we'll continue. We will ensure that. So, Councilmember Cameron.
Yeah, I would echo what you just said. I've worked with the ABR team in my own district and have, I completely agree that, by virtue of the fact of you being here, that's an important marker that you're engaged in this process. And so I thank you to the business owners who have joined us today for showing up and being a part of this conversation as well. My parents live off of Central, so this is a district that I know extremely well. I grew up in going along this route. We would go to 18th and a half Street all the time. And so very few people are aware of that area. But it is a major, major cultural hub for our immigrant communities in Minnesota. And so it's a really important district, particularly the Central and Lowry intersection. So I'm excited to have enhanced transit coming to this area because I think it's really important for that community, but also recognizing the fragility of the businesses in that area and how subtle changes can have a major impact on them. One of the questions I wanted to ask was, in your presentation, Jake, you mentioned on Central and First that there were some safety concerns. So that it's an interesting pinch point in the way that Northeast meets downtown. So could you talk about what those concerns were?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the Chair Barber, Councilmember, the safety concerns really fall into two buckets, if you will. Trying to ensure that we don't place platforms at unsignalized or uncontrolled intersections, so we don't encourage folks running across the street to, say, catch another bus, and instead trying to place them as close as possible to that safe crossing designated area. And so that applied to one alternative that we looked at, which was just north of 7th Street, where it turns into Monroe. The second location, I should say that same crossing at an unsignalized or uncontrolled intersection would apply further down the block to the south. We heard idea of potentially shifting it further south, and there we are concerned that we'd have folks darting across an unsafe in an unsafe way. The second sort of category of safety concern that is one that we heard from the city of Minneapolis, and it is regarding that odd intersection we see on the screen here. So in the southbound direction, Hennepin County is, as we've heard, has a project on First Avenue as well as Hennepin Avenue, and they are reconfiguring the way folks travel southbound and take a right off of Central onto First Avenue. That is a common way for folks to get into downtown Minneapolis, and so there's a lot of southbound to westbound right turns there. In addition to compatibility with the county's project, we heard from both county and city staff that a location so just north of the intersection could present some safety concerns with the number of right-turning vehicles and the interaction with both pedestrians and bicyclists, in addition to transit riders who are, of course, pedestrians.
All right, Councilmember Carter.
Yeah, I had a question, I was just wondering, when you go through the process with the, because I'm a small business owner, and I have been for the past 15 years. So when you go through the process with the small businesses, do you have a mock-up? So, because I understand you have glass shelters, and so do they get to really see what the proposed shelter is going to look like against maybe a mock-up of their business? So, because sometimes what we think is going to happen is not what actually happens. But if you can visually see it and you can see the parameters, then you have a place to start to try to negotiate some things. And so I was just wondering.
Yeah. Chair, Councilmember, we don't have a visual mock-up of a platform at these specific locations. But we do, in going into these conversations, we ensure that we bring examples that might be, that are existing and may be comparable. So we'll often reference examples on our existing arterial BRT network, the A line, C line, and D line. And I think, I can say in our conversation with Francis, we specifically pointed them to a certain existing platform in the network that we thought would portray the sort of the dynamic that could be once it's constructed.
And is there a certain, I was just wondering, what kind of variability do you have in those shelters? Do you have like enough variability so that when there is a problem, you can use model A as opposed to B or C? Or
Chair, Councilmember, yes, there is variability, and it's in this next phase, once we get into engineering, where we can, we're actually plopping down elements and understanding their relationship to doorways or windows or curbs. And so we do have some flexibility there, and are committed to working with stakeholders and others to make sure that we're mitigating any potential impact as best as we can within with those tweaks.
Chair, Councilmember, if I may expand on that. In the engineering phase of the project, the design phase of the project, when we're starting to do those types of things, we do then have renderings available as a tool to us to aid those conversations with, with neighboring businesses, with neighboring station neighbors. And so where we're looking at this is approximately what the shelter and pylon will look like adjacent to your building and adjacent to your business. And at that point, that really starts to help aid the conversation with us about, okay, are there modifications we can make to the placement of the amenities within this platform area to shift down, make sure that we're not directly in front of a doorway or these types of things at that level, at that phase of the conversation.
I'll just add some of the things, if you're out in the system, like you'll see that the pylons are consistent, but they're moved in different places, but it's so that's a Metro Transit ABRT, and the fare system is set up the same at each, but there is variability in what they look like, and that was because of these conversations with the communities and the residents or businesses in the areas. Councilmember Cameron.
So I had a question about two other station locations. So you presented on the ones with the largest volume of concerns, but there were a couple where there was a even split between those who were supportive and those who were concerned. So could you talk a little bit about the concerns at Central and 37th and University and 57th? What concerns came up and if those were resolved?
Chair, Councilmember, I can. So at Central and 37th, I recall that those comments in opposition were really reflective of the broader sort of pedestrian environment at that intersection. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but it's another sort of five-legged intersection. The city of Minneapolis and the city of Columbia Heights recently are actually constructing a project along 37th right now. And as part of that project, they looked at potentially modifying the intersection, but ultimately did not choose to do that. And so the comments were really regarding a need for pedestrian improvements there. In citing and I'm really talking about the northbound platform, in citing the platform there, we looked at some alternatives, but the northbound platform that we're recommending is really the only viable location that provides enough space for the platform. And it's sort of during, it's important feedback that we got so that we can incorporate that into the engineering phase. At University and 57th, those comments were largely regarding the proximity of the southbound platform near the entrance ramps to 694, and sort of interactions between buses and personal vehicles at that location. We have spoken with staff throughout the agency and gotten feedback, but that the proposal that we have for University and 57th is one that maximizes safety and operations at that location.
I think, for the Central and 37th, as well as, some of the discussion we've had around Central and Lowry is really working with our city partner Minneapolis and getting the support that the businesses and consumers in that area are looking for in terms of support for pedestrians, and then also the concerns that the Francis Berger Joint has around the outdoor seating. So I know that that's a little bit outside of our jurisdiction, but as we're moving along with this project and working with these partners, that we're addressing those concerns as well, while we have that leverage in our hands to support small businesses.
All right, any additional questions or comments? All right, seeing and hearing none, then I entertain a motion to approve business item 2023-134. Really?
I'm going to make the motion.
All right, motion by Councilmember Carter, second by Councilmember Cameron. Is there any other discussion?
That said, recognizing the pause, I think is simply about all of our concerns that we're able to move this through in such a manner that we recognize the concerns of the businesses, do our very, very best to enable solutions that help to address those concerns, as we want to make certain that this project, our F-line, when constructed, benefits all and enables all to grow. So thank you so much for the work thus far in that regard.
Thank you for that comment, Councilmember Cameron.
And I will add something to that, and that is, you know, some of the business owners have come before us and asked us for their consideration, and we take that very seriously. And so I would ask that as we move forward in this project, that we work very closely throughout the engineering phase in taking their feedback and recognizing the impact that this is going to have on their businesses. And just as a reminder that you did already mention an amendment to the corridor plan. And so if it is something that we have heard that it is not responsive to the businesses, that might be an opportunity for us as a council to take action if needed. So I hope that we can remain accountable in that process.
Okay, any additional discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And motion carries. Thank you. All right, next we're on to our next order of business. It's the same week item. It's business item 2023-161. It's the Metro Transit Master Partnership Contract with MnDOT. Nick Thompson.
Madam Chair, council members, Nick Thompson, Capital Projects. I'm here with business item 2023-161, same week. Amendment 1 to the Metro Transit Master Partnership Contract with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, or MnDOT. So MnDOT has developed a master partnership contract with Metro Transit to share facilities, equipment, staff, and other transportation-related services so they can promote efficiency with Metro Transit when we have joint projects. This master partnership contract with Metro Transit permits the parties to issue work orders between each other to support our capital projects and our engineering and facilities activities that we're conducting on shared facilities with MnDOT. We originally executed this master partnership contract in 2019 as part of the Green Line Extension Project, and that expired and was reissued in 2022. And that, at that time, it set a master partnership contract limit of $5,000. It is executed through Green Line, but it was anticipated to be used on other capital projects also. Recently, the council took action on 2023-132 as part of this F-line project that we were talking about to award the engineering design contract. And within that, the council will provide the MnDOT's preliminary design services for their portion of their design work of Central Corridor or Highway 65, Trunk Highway 65, in the amount of $2.4 million through the master partnership contract. So by combining the efficiency under our preliminary design work in the F-line design contract, it benefits both Metro Transit, but also MnDOT by streamlining the resolution of design issues as we're working on kind of redesign of that entire corridor between our agencies. And it allows us to have a concurrent design. And so we have a really focused design process that can work with businesses, both for stations, but also for the work MnDOT is doing for their portion of the road. So MnDOT has approached us and would like to increase the cumulative limit of the total compensation to be paid by MnDOT to Metro Transit from the initial $5,000 up to a new limit of $5 million to cover the work within the design work of the F-line, the $2.4 million, but also provide potential work orders on other capital projects that we jointly work on. So the proposed action tonight is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to execute Amendment 1 to the Master Partnership Contract 22-10003 with the Minnesota Department of Transportation to allow the council to receive up to $5 million from MnDOT for various professional and technical services performed by Metro Transit capital projects. With that, Madam Chair, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Cameron.
Can you clarify, I guess I'm not tracking this. So why was the initial limit amount set so low?
Madam
Because-
Chair, Councilmember, that's a great question. Originally, it was for us to do work where MnDOT would do work on our behalf. So it was more of us paying them. There wasn't MnDOT work with necessarily on Green Line within our project. And this time, we are adding MnDOT's work to our project, and so we're raising the limit. When originally conceptualized in 2019, there wasn't anticipated to be as much MnDOT work like a design contract. And so this was kind of a new way to make a new efficiency that wasn't originally envisioned in 2019, but has now been realized for F-line.
Right. Additional questions or comments? Councilmember Chambliss.
I'd like to make a motion to accept business item 2023-161, same week.
Very good. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Vento. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and the motion carries. Thank you, Nick. All right, next we are on to business item 2023-162, a joint committee item. It's imposing a regional transportation sales and use tax. And we have Ed Petrie. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. Ed Petrie, Director of Finance, Metro Transit. I am here to present business item 2023-162 JT. It's imposing a regional transportation sales and use tax, and resolution 2023-8. I'll just give you some background. This past legislative session, the legislature passed and imposed an addition to the sales and use tax in the metro region of 0.75% or 0.75% to be used for transportation and transit purposes. The governor signed this on May 26th, and this tax will go into effect on October 1st, 2023. In a manner similar to the council passing resolutions to enact our property tax levy, the Minnesota Department of Revenue is requiring the council to pass a resolution imposing this sales tax. The legislation says the council must impose the sales tax, and council staff have worked with the Department of Revenue and also our Office of General Counsel to draft the business item and the associated resolution that's attached. The Department of Revenue will be responsible for implementing and administering the sales tax. As we will talk about in the budget presentation with this evening, that this was a big financial win for transportation in our region and for the council and our transportation programs. Estimated that this sales tax, first of all, in calendar year 2023 will generate about $100 million. And in calendar year 24 is estimated at about $433 million. So a significant amount of money. The council staff and the leadership, including myself, we're working to develop a plan to incorporate these funds both into the 2023 and the future budgets, for example, into 2024 in both our operating and our capital plans. This resolution will go to the Management Committee on August 9th and the full council on August 23rd. And Madam Chair, the motion is that the Metropolitan Council adopts Resolution 2023-8, imposing a regional transportation sales and use tax. And with that, I would stand for questions. And I also have Stuart McMullen, the council's budget director, with me this evening.
Thank you. Councilmember Vento, then Councilmember Carter.
I'll move approval.
Councilmember Carter.
I'll second that motion and stand for comments.
Is there any other discussion? Thank you. A great legislative session and administration for this. This is years of working under a looming structural deficit, and this is something that's going to change how we can do business going forward and with a real eye to the future. So very happy. Any other discussion? Councilmember Carter.
Not on the resolution, but on the comments and funding. Did I hear you say that this generates $100 million in 2023?
That is correct. Madam Chair, that is correct. And $433 million in calendar 24. So in 2023, Madam Chair, it starts in October 1st. So that would be for October, November, and December of 2023.
Right. And then it says $300 million in state fiscal year 2024. So you're overlapping.
Yeah.
Got it.
Madam Chair,
Right.
Madam Chair, committee members, that's one of the things we were talking about. We talk state fiscal years, but then our budgets are calendar years.
But
So the state fiscal year would go from July 1st of 23 through June 30th of 24.
Yes, and I'm not asking for an amendment to the action, but I am noting that the funding here does not speak to the funds generated in 2023 for our fiscal year 2023. And is that true, the 100 million? Or does that 300 million overlap? Yeah, it does. I'm
Madam Chair,
sorry.
yeah, it's included within it. The business item talks in state fiscal year numbers. The numbers I quoted you were in
Got it.
calendar year numbers.
Yes, but
They're
that
one and the same,
100
but
million is included in that state fiscal year 2024.
Madam Chair,
And
committee
thank
members,
you.
it is, yes.
Got it.
It is. That's one of the complications. Then when you throw federal fiscal years into things, that
Yeah, we'll
really
mess-
muddies
we'll mess
things
it all
up.
up
So,
again.
yes, exactly.
Thank you for responding.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm ready.
Any additional questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we are on to business item 2023-171, another same week item. It's the equity evaluation of regional transportation investment amendment 1. And we have Amy Venowitz here.
Madam Chair and members, good evening. I'm Amy Venowitz with MTS Transportation Planning. The business item before you today, 2023-171, is a contract amendment for the project equity evaluation of regional transportation. The amendment will add $308,500, bringing the total project to an amount of $718,500. So the purpose of this project is to evaluate our existing major transportation investment decision-making processes and to develop recommendations, hopefully that would make the processes more equitable and also to result in more equitable project outcomes from our regional transportation investments. So this project has been underway since mid-2022. It received special equity initiative funding from the council in the amount of $420,000. And the project is scheduled to be complete in June of 2024. A major piece of this project is to work with what we are calling an equity policy group, or EPG. And the EPG is responsible for leading the project effort work and then developing the project recommendations. The EPG consists of 16 community members from throughout the region and 2 ex officio members, one from the council, Councilmember Chambliss, and also a MnDOT representative. To date, the EPG has met on 7 occasions, and their work has focused on building community rapport, building committee rapport, discussing equity and transportation equity and what that means to them, developing a working definition of transportation equity, and then also so far selecting 3 generic project types, which they will evaluate in the coming meetings. The 3 project types that we will be evaluating kind of in a generic sense are LRT, BRT transitway investments, highway capacity investments, and bike and pedestrian investment processes. This is a pilot project, and our approach to this project, particularly using the EPG, is unique. We are paying the project members, and I will say what we have found with this project is there's a lot of time and effort required to running a committee of this constitution, communicating with members, planning the meeting agendas, working with our consultant to really think about how we're presenting items to the committee, working with the co-chairs to help prepare them for the committee meetings. It was just a lot of effort that I think we did not anticipate when we first scoped this project. It's needed effort. I really do think the project is making good progress, but we are not going to be able to finish this project without adding additional funds into the contract. And that is why I'm in front of you today. I should have also mentioned this is a same week item. We're on a little bit of a tight time schedule to be able to keep the consultant working along the way. So that is the background on this project. And in The motion before you today is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to execute an amendment increasing the contract amount for contract 21P272 with Bolton and Mank, Inc. by $308,500 to conduct the equity evaluation of regional transportation investment, thereby resulting in a total project amount not to exceed $718,500. And with that, I can answer any questions about the project.
Thank you, Amy. Questions or comments? Councilmember Pacheco.
Yes, Madam Chair, members. You know, I increasingly get more and more frustrated every time I see the name equity, because it's always attached to some silo that I'm unaware of. But I co-chair the Equity Advisory Committee. I haven't heard of this until now. I don't know that I don't know how, and maybe you can explain to me today, how the Equity Advisory Committee is engaged in this process. There's 21 members, and they are appointed. And unfortunately, we're not getting the representation that we have in these meetings. And part of that is, I think, they're not engaged in a meaningful way. And so if you could explain to me how this fits with our Equity Advisory Committee, I'd really appreciate it.
Councilmember Pacheco, Chair and Councilmember Pacheco. So this project has been around with the previous council. It is a project that is contained in our transportation policy work program. We moved it forward into the annual unified planning work program that the council adopts, and it's been in the 2022 and the 2023 work programs. And then we were in front of the council when we requested the special equity initiative funding, and we've also done updates to the management committee on the project. And I know that's all council work. We have been in front of the EAC. I would have to get you the specific date. I think it was in 2022, but that was just to, I think it was as we were scoping the project and to get some feedback about the overall scope of the project. I think we could do better with the EAC and figure out when and how to come to them. One of the things we struggled with a little bit with this project is we are asking this group to do very specific recommendations and evaluate in detail investment processes. And so that is all they are focused on. And it is a level of effort that I think the reason we went with this type of a group rather than using the EAC is that this group is meeting 15 times, very focused on this effort. It would have been something that would have totally, I think, consumed the EAC and what they're doing. We have 2.5-hour meetings, and they are very detailed discussions into transportation investment specifically. So that's what I can kind of tell you about how we've been operating. I think, as I said, we could do better moving forward on going in front of the EAC and keeping them apprised of the work to date. I'd say we're less than halfway through the project at this point.
Madam Chair.
Councilmember Pacheco.
Then where does the Equity Advisory Committee, the internal, I think it's an Equity Advisory Committee that we have in operation now, where do they come from and how are they connected?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Pacheco, the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity was engaged on this project early on as a true partner. We did have input on the scope, and we served on the selection committee, and the Enterprise Equity Senior Manager is part of ongoing conversations. Also, as Amy mentioned, there was a presentation to EAC. Again, it was specific to feedback on the scope, asking for recommendations to serve on the EPG, Equity Policy Group. So we have stayed engaged on this project and will remain engaged on this project.
There's also an equity task force. Okay.
Councilmember Pacheco, Chair Barber, the Equity Task Force is specific to the Regional Development Guide and the 2050 plan. So it's specific to that effort.
And just one of the final one here. There is also a contract that we have out now. I don't know if we've made a decision on that one. It's something like in the $200,000 and $250,000 range to look at what we're doing in equity with small business. How is that engaged?
Yes, the project manager for that project is our Enterprise Equity Senior Manager, Lila Eltaweely. That is still in the, I don't know how much I can say about their project because it is, I think they're at the stage where they're evaluating responders to that proposal. And I think they're close to making a recommendation or decision on the best value proposer.
And I think that's focused on small business that we contract with, or and what we've been doing and what we're going, and we chose to have an outside evaluator do this work too. That's right.
Chair Barber, Councilmember Pacheco, yes, that is specific to operation of our small business programs, our procurements and contracting throughout the agency, and will include recommendations and review of our past efforts.
Well, again, I'm speaking as the chair or co-chair of the advisory committee, and we've struggled because we haven't had the attendance that we've wanted. And I've spoken to the chair, and we're looking at the possibility of having fewer. There's 21 members now. We get maybe 4 or 5 showing at this point. We have a letter out there to look at how we can increase it, but. Again, I just want to be clear that if we're going to put the effort and time into the advisory committee and have them audition or apply and the like, then we really need to take them seriously and make sure we have their inclusion in a lot of these decisions that are involved with equity that we're also seeing today.
And just a little historical context, there's a part of the funding through the regional administrator becomes funds that if there's extras that we can direct how some of that money gets spent. This was one of those, and we always put them as equity projects for some of these things. This was one of these equity projects I approved in 2019 or 2020. It's been a while, but it was because when we were talking about the different projects at the time, the conversation was these transportation investments are so big that it's really important to make sure that equity is part of the discussion. Do you have any comments or thoughts? Just you've been participating in the group.
Yeah, very good questions. It is a very intensive discussion that they have on a regular basis. And I think having, different groups adds values, and it does kind of allow folks to go deep in the areas that they're interested in. But I do agree with Councilmember Pacheco that more reporting and collaboration with the Equity Advisory Group can be very helpful. There's always room for improvement. It's a new initiative, fairly new, so I think it's good that we have so many different equity initiatives, and maybe we should do a report on all of the different initiatives that we have and how they all tie together. I think your questions, Pacheco, leads me to think that would be very helpful.
Additional questions, comments? Councilmember Carter?
I had raised my hand before, but certainly listening to Councilmember Chambliss, I believe that she's made the point, and that is that it's very good that we have a lot of work going on that is focused on equity. And as we build that work, as we deepen it, it is also very important that the work is aligned and that a team of people from our community who have come to the table to focus on across the board equity at the Metropolitan Council be engaged to understand how the work is proceeding and how it is all connected together. I also sit with Councilmember Pacheco on the Equity Advisory Committee and would very much like to see a cohesive discussion that engages those who do come to the table, that also motivates them to remain at the table as they understand where we are situated and where, as we look toward our 2050 regional development guide, where those movements are happening that will help us to embed equity across the board at Metropolitan Council and to understand that equity work. So I didn't think I was going to say a lot. I said more than I wanted to. But yes, and thank you for that concerted attention to tying this work together and to getting it done as well.
Councilmember Carter?
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm not on the equity committee, but actually I plan on being on there next year. But because I just don't want to spread myself out too thin, but I think it's some of the most important work that we do, obviously. And to the extent anything is disconnected in terms of equity efforts, I think they're weakened. And so we just have to, really put our eyes on making sure that we're connected as much as possible so that we don't weaken any efforts, because it's kind of like you could orphanize the efforts, so to speak. So that's my concern. So, but if we're all working together, then we strengthen all our efforts. So hopefully that's the direction we're going in.
All right, any additional? Councilmember Carter?
I believe this is a motion before us to.
Don't believe we had a motion yet.
Okay, I'll make that motion to approve this work. Thank you.
And is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Vento. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing and hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and the motion carries. Thank you, everyone. And I would say, because two of the items are same week, one is a joint and the other one is the F line, that they all go non-consent to the full council. All right, now we're on to our information item, which is this teeny tiny thing, and won't take us long because you guys don't ask me any questions. So, I love that you ask questions. And please ask questions. We have a couple of natural stops that we're going to do kind of a background interview, then there'll be a Metro Transit section and an MTS section. But yes, so we're going to kind of pause so everyone can stop and ask questions kind of in between, because I know for at least a number of you, this is new and probably the first budget meeting you've had since you've been council members. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Ed Petrie and Heather Kiesel.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair, committee members. Once again, Ed Petrie, I'm Director of Finance, Metro Transit.
And I'm Heather Giesel. I am the Director of Finance and Administration for CD and MTS.
And as the chair mentioned, we have basically three sections that we're going to be talking about this evening. Talking about first of all, budget development and overall transportation overview. Then we'll move into the how that then applies to Metro Transit, and then how that then applies to MTS. And we have, I believe, 39 slides, so we will move forward. And if you want us to slow down or speed up, please stop us or please make comments as we're going. First of all, the council budget development schedule. As you're aware, we start our activities in the May-July time period. We normally come to the committees in July, like we are here this evening. In August, the council will then adopt its preliminary budget and its levies. We then will normally come back to the council then in October, where we will talk about our capital program and then adopt then the public hearing drafts, which will then go out for public hearing. And then we will come back in December then with our final recommended budget and levies for the council to adopt. One of the changes you'll note here is in the October schedule. Normally, we will do the budget portion in August, but we're also showing another stop in the month of October. The reason we're doing that is because of the Metropolitan Transportation Sales Tax we talked about earlier this evening. We have some of that planned in our 2024 budget, but we are working through a lot of work on that right now, which I'll talk about in a few slides. But we just want to let you know that we're going to be proposing our preliminary budget right now, but between that and the public hearing draft, we will come back with the public hearing draft with some additional changes and recommendations we would recommend before we go out for public hearing. So first of all, the basis for the budget schedule or budget development, first of all, it's per Minnesota statute 473-125, which basically says that we are responsible and the regional administrator is responsible for preparing a budget and then presenting that to the council, which is part of the work that we are doing this evening. Our overall transportation division includes both the Metro Transit family and the Metropolitan Transport Services family. On the Metro Transit side, it includes our bus, large bus, the Metro Blue and the Green lines, North Star, the Metro Orange and Red line, our various BRTs, and some capital project development. On the MTS side, it includes all the contracted bus services, Metro Mobility, Planning, Transit Link, and Van Pool. So this is the family of services we'll be discussing this evening. When we develop our budgets, first I'll apologize here. When we develop our budgets, we have a few different things that we're looking at when we develop them. First of all, we have on the left-hand side, council policies and actions that the council has taken or will take. And then we also then have forecasts and legislation from the state of Minnesota that we're using to develop it. So on the left-hand side, first of all, council actions. First of all, we have the Thrive 2040 and the 2050 plan is right now in development. That'll be part of our standards for developing standards for the transportation policy plan. All the regional standards are evaluated and measured against performance for all regional services, whether it's Metro Transit, Metropolitan Transportation Services, or the private providers. One of the things that we do on an annual basis is we'll review all routes and look at how the routes are performing. And one of the things we have a term that's called harvest and reinvest. If a route is not performing according to the standards, we will evaluate that route and maybe potentially come back to the council with a recommendation for a change, investing that from Route A to Route B for future service. Labor agreements is another thing that we have as part of the council policy and actions. We have multiple labor agreements that are approved by the council, including wage parameters that are set by human resources. And these wage parameters and our current council labor agreements and forecaster agreements are included within the budget development this evening. We also have fare policy that sets the regional standards for our fares. And when we set the fares, it's a regional fare. Our fares are good on bus, light rail, Metropolitan Transportation Services, and the regional providers. So the council sets a regional fare policy. We'll talk about this in a few slides. We have the allocation of federal relief funds. If you recall, there were 3 separate lettings of federal relief monies that the council received in, about $725 million for the region. We have been using that over the last couple of years in our budgets to offset declines with ridership and associated revenues, and also to offer additional assistance towards additional capital or cleaning maintenance, those types of items. The council also has a target fund balance policy where we have a minimum fund balance that's recommended that we maintain. For example, on the Metro Transit family of services, it's 8.3%, which is equal to 1 month expense. That's our minimum fund balances. In MTS, I believe it ranges around 10 to 15% for their family of services. Forecast and legislation. One of the things we've talked about many times is we do have a multi-year forecast that we do. We call it our toolbox. The reason we call it our toolbox is we forecast for the next 4 years, but then we have tools that we look at, whether it's a fare increase, service reductions, or any other items that we can use to help to balance ourselves for the next 4 years. So we make sure our budget, first of all, is in line with our forecast, multi-year forecast. Motor vehicle sales tax, we talked about that before. We get a forecast from the state of Minnesota in February and November of each year. Right now, our proposed budget is based upon the February forecast that we received in February 2023. Right before we adopt, in November, we will receive an updated motor vehicle sales tax forecast from the state of Minnesota. That will be one change that we will make between the public hearing draft and when we bring the budget to the council in December. That'll be the one change we'll let you know. Motor vehicle sales tax has changed, gone up or down, and we will then tie into that November forecast before we recommend adoption. State general fund appropriations, we have state general fund appropriations that we have from the legislature that covers our rail and commuter rail operations and metro mobility. We'll talk about the federal relief funds. One big change is metro mobility. This happened a couple of years ago at the legislature. Metro mobility is going to become a state forecasted program in state fiscal year 26. This was something very, very important for the council, meaning that for the operations of metro mobility, it will now move to the state. So that is a significant amount of money, and I know Heather will talk about that in her presentation. One of the things within our budget, we're including the Metropolitan Transit sales tax. We talked about that in my business item a few minutes ago. One of the things that we will point out is within the budget this evening, first of all, the Metropolitan Transportation sales tax is supplanting the county's contributions on light rail and commuter rail and for the Orange Line. We know what that is today. So that will be in our budget this evening. But there are a lot of other items that we are looking at with the sales tax, whether it's other items for operations, there's like 13 items that I'll discuss, also on the capital side. Those will be items that we'll be working on between now and when you adopt the public hearing draft. So those will be additional changes that we'll bring in for recommendation for the use of the sales tax. Heather and I will also come forward in September for a recommendation with our 2023 budgets for changes with our 2023 budget for that $100 million and recommend how we bring that into the budgets for the balance of calendar 23. With the sales tax, the final bullet point here is removing the county's operating contributions. As we had mentioned that the counties have been contributing, for example, 50% on the blue line, 50% on the green line. That contribution is now being replaced by the Metropolitan Transportation sales tax effective October 1st. So we'll be making that change October 1st of 2023. So talking about the sales tax. First of all, in the preliminary budget, like I mentioned, we will be replacing, or we have recommended a replacement of the county's next subsidy contributions for light rail, commuter rail, and the Orange Line. What we'll be bringing forward, though, between now and the public hearing draft will be additional analysis that we are working on. Heather and I and Leslie and Charles, we are working also with Stuart and Marie Henderson. We're actually working on forecasts to take us from year 2023 to 2053. So we're actually doing 30-year forecasts, not only for the revenues, but we're forecasting operations, any of the new LRTs or BRTs or ABRT lines that will come online. We're forecasting our current operations. We're forecasting our current capital programs for existing services. And we're forecasting also the future capital maintenance of all of our lines. For example, the replacement of rail cars, the replacement of stations, replacements of track, catenary poles, all those different types of items that will be replaced over the next 30 years. So we're trying to forecast all that out for the next 30 years and comparing that to our sales tax receipts. We'll be talking about in another slide, talking about there's 13 other additional items that the legislature has recommended that they wanted investments in with the sales tax. And we're also going to be analyzing that. So as I mentioned, we'll forecast that against the forecasted tax receipts. I know Stuart McMullen has been working with the Department of Revenue and getting a forecasted percentage from them what to forecast for the next 30 years. This plan, though, just want to let you know, this will be something that we will be reviewing on an annualized basis. This will be a 30-year plan that I look at. It's going to be a rolling plan that every single year will come back to the committee, come back to the council, and report how the council is doing against this 20-year or 30-year plan. Are we in target? Are expenses higher or lower than what we anticipated, or are revenues higher or lower? And what our strategy is. So this is something that you will hear Heather and I talk to you a lot about in the coming years. Our transportation division. With our transportation division, it implements the tribe of the MSP 2040 implementation. It'll also implement the future 2050. Within our budget, we're growing our transit service while responding to ridership and also market development across the region. So as we're coming out of COVID, we're watching ridership. We're watching ridership demand, market demand wherever those demands are, and we're trying to match that with our planned service. As I talked about, we look at our budget not only with the current year, but with a multi-year forecast for the next 4 years. We look at council levies, we have our reserve policies, and we also make sure that we're supporting the regional transportation policy plan. Some budget framework considerations that we consider when we move into the budget. First of all, is our budget is basically, it's a bottom-up budget. We budget by the respective departments, all their revenues, all their expenses, whether it's salary, supplies, parts, all those different costs, and then we will then roll it up by every one of the departments, then rolled up into the Metro Transit family or the MTS family. We also look at levels of service, whether it's our base service or future expansion. We're really watching closely, though, as we talked about over the last couple of years, ridership and revenue changes with our travel market. Because as we're coming out of COVID, we're watching the ridership, whether it's local service or whether it's express service, any type of service, light rail, et cetera, and where that ridership is coming back and any changes that we're seeing in our travel market. One of the things that we've talked about historically, for example, with travel is the fact that we used to always have a peak period, morning peak and an afternoon peak. One of the things that we're noticing with travel is that we don't have as much of the strong peak periods anymore. It's a lot more consistent over the day. So that's one of the things that we're actually looking at now with our service demand, and trying to match it with what we're seeing with the new market. We'll continue our investments in our customer experience, public safety, technology, and facility upkeep. And we'll also, as we mentioned, we'll be bringing forward the investments with the Metropolitan Transit sales tax. Like we said, it says here, in progress. That's one of the things we just want to keep instilling with the council, is the fact that there's a lot of work being done on this. We don't have all the answers tonight, but as things change, as we know more, we'll come forward with the public hearing draft and make those recommendations. As with any budget, we have volatility. Some of the areas of volatility we have, first of all, is with motor vehicle sales tax. With motor vehicle sales tax, as you would anticipate, as the economy ebbs and flows, in good times, people are out buying vehicles. When the economy starts to slow, one of the first things that people look at is driving their vehicle, driving their car or truck a little longer, because they have to pay the rent, they have to buy food, whatever the case would be. So one of the things that the council chose, we went on to the motor vehicle sales tax in 2008. One of the decisions the council made at that time was to budget 95% of the state forecast. What happens then is anything that we collect in excess of that 95% is then available for the next year's operations. Since the beginning of time, we're at about 99% of the state forecast. So we've been running pretty close. It ebbs and flows certain years, but it was a good decision by the council. The fact is, we're trying to manage volatility, but also trying to watch with the ebbs and flows with the economy. Fuel price hedging. One of the things that the council does, we are the Metropolitan Council is the largest consumer of diesel fuel in the state of Minnesota. About 7 million gallons of diesel fuel we consume. One of the things that we do for budget certainty is we actually hedge out our fuel, 90% of our consumption for the next 2 years. So we know what's going to happen for the next year, for 2024. We know what our fuel price is. It's $3.11 on average. That's what we're budgeting this evening. So one of the things that we noticed this past year, like in 2022, when fuel prices are so high, when our contracts come up, like I said, we hedge fuel out for the next 24 months. 1/24 is coming due every single month. When that comes due, we renew the contracts. Comes due, we renew the contracts. So some of the fuel prices that we saw real high in 2022, we'll see that coming forward like in year 2025. So those are some of the things that we watch closely, but like I said, we hedge fuel for budget certainty. We're programming the federal funds to mitigate volatility, for example, the volatility that we have with ridership. We have our fund reserves that the council has set, and then we'll bring in the sales tax. Some of the things we do to track ongoing risk is we're watching, like I said, ridership and the travel demand. We're watching the markets, trying to see if we're seeing changes with the travel markets. One of the things I work very closely with our Strategic Initiatives Department. I work with them, we forecast our ridership between bus, light rail, the BRT lines, express lines, local lines, and we're forecasting and trying to look at historical trends, current trends, then forecast it forward for the next year to year and a half. And that will be also one change that we will probably make between now and when we adopt or recommend for adoption the public hearing draft. Because the last ridership forecast I've done with them was back in May. So we will continue to watch ridership trends over the summer. In about September, we'll rerun the models again and see if we're trending on track, ahead or behind it, and make those recommended adjustments. We've talked about sales tax volatility. Another ongoing risk we have is workforce shortages. We have talked about that. That's operators, mechanics, police, any support staff. That's a challenge for us. It's a challenge across the industry. It's a challenge across many businesses. But that's one of the things we're also watching very closely. We talked about fuel. And then the final point that I'll make is, I think I stressed this a lot to this evening, is that we continually evaluate and review the budget. Current year, next 4 years. And we review our budgets with this multi-year toolbox at least twice a year. And so we're continually updating the models and looking at our models and seeing how are we going to budget compared to budget, but how are we looking for the next 4. And then that gives us then time to reevaluate and or make any changes and recommend any changes to the council if necessary. Revenue assumptions. Like I said, we have state general fund and motor vehicle sales tax. Those are both from legislation. We have the sales tax that we're going to be working with once again, Department of Revenue, forecasting that forward. We're removing the county contributions, replacing that with sales tax, programming federal relief funds. Currently, right now, we anticipate that we will use our federal relief funds through calendar 24. So through calendar 24, we will have used those funds. Very, very lucky, though, as many council members that are returning council members recall, when COVID hit in 2020, very dire times originally for us, and but for $725 million of federal relief funds, would have been a very challenging times for the Transportation Division. One of the things we did immediately at that time was we forecasted, because we lost about 80 to 90% of our ridership. We looked at what reserves we had, how much revenue we thought we were going to collect. At that point in time, when March of 2020, we did these forecasts, we had enough money to carry us through about June of 2021. So, but for those federal relief monies, we would be in a very different situation today. So we're very thankful that we had received those funds. They have bridged the gap for us to now the sales tax. So that was very happy about that. Ridership recovery. The bus system right now is a percentage of pre-COVID levels. We're forecasting right now our bus system at 57%. This is one of them I anticipate that will change between now and the public hearing draft, because we're running right now at about the 57%. So bus ridership has slowly been coming back. So we're very happy about that. Our light rail system, we're forecasting about in the 61, 62% range. We're thinking that one may also adjust slightly between now and public hearing. When I say adjust, I mean positive. It may adjust positive. Metro Mobility, they're forecasting at 100% for next year. North Star is the challenge that we have right now. Our budget is at 20% of pre-COVID levels. Right now, they're back about 10, 11% of pre-COVID levels. That's an express service, and that's one level of service that's been very hard to crack that nut and to bring back. Council ridership. This is one chart that it's hard, it's difficult to look at. So if you look at 2019, that's our last pre-COVID year. We tallied in at about 82 million rides. Then COVID hit. We were in 2020 and 2021, very low ridership. You can see ridership is slowly starting to come back. Our 2022 actual is about 42 million rides. Our 24 budget is budgeted at about 48 million rides. So it's slowly coming back. We're watching it closely. Our 23 budget, when we set the 23 budget in probably about May of 2022. So we weren't sure what the trends were gonna happen. So now we have a lot more better information over the last 2 years, which is allowing us to set, I feel, a stronger budget in 2024. But that's one of the things that Heather and I will come back before we adopt a public hearing draft. And I suspect that the 24 budget will move up slightly, we'll move up a little more. The forthcoming sales tax, as we talked about, once again, it's a 3/4 cent sales tax. It'll start October 1st. How it's split, 17% of it goes to the counties, 83% of the sales tax will come to the council. Of that, 5% will go to active transportation to the tab, and then 95% comes to the council for transit operations. And that could be for operations, maintenance, or capital projects or capital maintenance. Now here I'm going to give you the state fiscal year number. State fiscal year number 24 is $300 million. Once again, that starts October 1st through June 30th of 2024. The current forecast from the Department of Revenue is just over $300 million. State fiscal year 25, which starts July 1 of 24 through June 30th of 25, is about $465 million. And one of the important things with this that we're putting in the budget this evening is that we're ending the funding agreements with the counties. That'll be for Hennepin, Ramsey, Anoka, and Dakota counties. That'll be for the blue, green, North Star, and orange line. As I mentioned with the metro area sales tax, there's also other uses that are recommended by not recommended, but they're required by the legislature. But the sales tax, first of all, it's going to help to fund transit operations, our maintenance, capital projects, and ongoing capital maintenance. There's basically broken into three main categories. First of all, there's improvements to our system. That would be both improvements on regular route bus service levels. It can be for transit safety, including additional transit officials. It can be used for accessibility at our transit stops and our transit centers, and for also new and replacement shelters. New shelters, heating, lighting, all those types of things at our shelters. On our BRT or bus rapid transit system, this will include both planning and project development, operations, capital, and future capital maintenance of those lines. Other investments, first of all, we have the zero emission bus. This is our electric bus program. The funds are eligible to be used for that. Our microtransit projects, active transportation that we have, and also for wages for the Metro Transit hourly operations employees. So these are basically, you'll hear like, this is the slated 13 items that are recommended from the legislature. These are the 13 items. We've already talked about the federal relief funds. The council received originally $725 million of federal relief funds in 3 lettings. This was for the transportation region. Of that, $686 million was retained with the council, and approximately, if my math is right, just about $30 million then went to the regional providers. That's like Southwest, Plymouth, MBTA, those providers. In our 2024 budget, we have included approximately $68 million of federal relief funds, and I believe by the end of 2024, those funds will be expended. Those funds were awarded to the council based upon the guidelines of 5307, the 5307 formula funds. You've heard of those funds. That's how the funds came into the council under those rules. With an emphasis on payroll and transit operations. And the final bullet point is that the grantee must follow federal grant rules and guidelines. We are being audited. We'll be audited very closely. We went through our first audit in 2022. Came through the audit very well, but they're watching how we're drawing the money, what we're using it, and they are really analyzing our backup of making sure that we are spending the $686 million or the full $725 in accordance with the rules of the grants. So that's that type of, I appreciate the oversight, and I'm glad that oversight is happening across the nation. So our expense, transportation division, our expense assumptions. We have included all the different various service levels for bus. For example, our bus service next year is running at about 88% of pre-COVID levels. We're increasing our base service about 2.5%. Light rail, we're proposing to bring the light rail back to a 10-minute frequency. We're currently running at 10. Provided we can get the operators, recommending bringing it back to a 10-minute frequency next year. Commuter rail will include 8 weekday trips. for morning, for afternoon, and special event service. Metro Mobility, I believe you'll talk about your service levels on Metro Mobility, and then Heather will talk on Transit Link, Van Pool, and Micro Transit. Our expenses on the expense side, we have existing contracts for both salaries, benefits, and also estimates that we receive from human resources for the future contracts. We've built in expenses for contracted services, fuel forwarding, as we talked about, parts and supplies based upon service plans. As we get into the budget a little further, that's one of the challenges that we have in the budget now in 2023, but also in 2024. Anything that is computerized, we're seeing significant 10, 15% increase in some of those supplies, anything that has computerized components to it. So that is one of the challenges that we will have moving forward. We also have some expenditures for transit safety, and then also the regional allocations that we get from the corporate services. Regional allocations will include items for payroll, budget, the chair's office, diversity, all those regional shared services. That then gets allocated across the council to Metropolitan, MTS, Metro Transit, environmental services, all the regional services. So we do have a piece of regional allocations in our budget. The overall budget for the transportation division is, for next year, proposed budget, preliminary right now, $748 million. But this will change, this will move up once we bring in the additional sales tax with the preliminary or the public hearing budget in September. But right now, our preliminary budget right now, which is the county's portion of it, is $748 million. The right-hand side, you see the sources of revenues. Motor vehicle sales tax is our largest source of revenue. It's one of our most volatile, but it's our largest source in at 40%. We have state appropriations in at about 12%. That's the appropriations for the light rail, the commuter rail, and for Metro Mobility. You'll see planned use of reserves of $116 million. As part of our multi-year forecast, we're continually looking at reserves and using them up and down and balancing, but maintaining the council's minimum reserve levels. So even with this use of reserves in 2014, we are still at or above minimum reserve levels. County funding, you'll see in here at $2.4 million. That represents on the North Star piece, that is Sherburne County and MnDOT's piece. They both pay 8.05% of the net subsidy on North Star. That's their slice of that. We have the sales tax replacing the county's piece in at about 6% of the budget. That's $46 million. That's replacing the Hennepin County, Ramsey County, Hennepin-Ramsey, Sherburne County, and Dakota County. I'm just counting on my fingers here. That is for the blue, green, North Star, and orange lines. Fares in at 8%. It's low, but one of the things you also see that we're using federal dollars in at about 15%. That's offsetting the decrease in the fares as they come back. The fund transfer, $15 million or about 2% of our budget. Remember, earlier I mentioned that we budget 95% of the motor vehicle sales tax. In 2022, we collected in excess of the 95%, $15 million. That will be used now for 2024 operations. And then all other revenues, that includes mainly advertising revenue and some interest income. On the expense side, you can see the largest portion is Metro Transit Bus, in at 59% of the budget. We have then our capital programs, which is people, staff that are working on capital programs, like on Southwest, Blue Line, all those different projects, their salaries and benefits. We have the light rail, which is a consolidated of $108 million. That's the Metro Blue and the Green Line. That's services that are currently operating today. We have North Star of $18 million, Metro Mobility Service of $105, our fixed route Transit Link, and then the planning services, all in at $748 million. But as I mentioned, this will be proposed for change when we come back for the public hearing draft. And with that, Madam Chair, that's the first break.
Okay.
I'll take a breath.
All right, questions, comments? It's a lot, so. And there's lots of opportunities along this process. This is the first round, so. All right, Councilmember Carter.
So let me just ask this stupid question to make sure that I heard this right. When we look at the bottom slide and you say this will be proposed as a changed budget when you come back for the public comment version, it is at that point where the $100 million will be added.
That's correct.
And the expenses that you are recommending for that 100 million.
Chair and committee members, I'll make one caveat there. We will come in September with a budget amendment for 2023. We will recognize within that budget amendment, both in operating
This is
capital, the
right.
$100 million.
Okay, so it's in September that you come for 20.
For the 100 million. Then when we come for the public hearing draft that you will then adopt in October, that will come with a recommendation for the $400 million that we'll collect in calendar 2024. We're recognizing right now 46 million of that. So there's still, there's over $350 million yet to identify where it's going to go.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Would you like a cough drop? I have one.
Got one.
Okay, good. Okay, good. So with the public hearing draft, that 350 million plus, we will then recommend at that point whether we recommend it for operating, capital, or where we recommend it to go. Does that answer your question?
It does, it answers the two questions.
Great, thank you.
All right, additional questions or comments?
And Chair, one of the things I do want to also mention too is that we will be coming forward as a consolidated, the first council meeting in August. We'll present the transportation budget again, open for more questions, and then we'll be back in October again. So you'll have a few opportunities to ask additional questions. And if you have questions before then, please feel free to reach out to Heather or myself. And we'll try to help you as we move forward.
And you'll be coming back with the capital budget too.
Yeah, we will also come back with a capital budget. So you'll probably be tired of hearing from us between now and October, so if there's okay, go ahead.
So I appreciate all that has to go into the various manipulations that you're working on to share with us recommendations for multiple budgets and to look into future years.
Yep.
And I know a lot of your future year assumptions are going to be very rough and, just assumptions in essence, because they do depend and rely upon what this council and all of our partners perceive as vision for the future and the priorities that we will live into. I am looking very forward to not just this budget and the recommendations for 2023 and 2024 additions, but to a relationship that provides advice to the council as to where we might dream. What our gaps are that we're filling and what our opportunities are for the future are dependent upon that vision and also dependent upon, of course, the availability of funds to meet that vision. So there's an iterative process that has to go on between, of course, your office and the recommendations you're making in this council and the recommendations and budgets that we support. And I'm just not feeling that space right now. So forgive me, but I just have to say that, and it's really for us more so. And that is to say that we need to work through, what that careful process is of our adopting our vision for the future as we look at
Yeah, and I will say, you will feel a push and pull throughout this entire process because we have very distinct divisions and funds and sources that live within each of those divisions. Things that are, I know you come out of county government, there's things that are mandated by state and federal levels, some of that push and pull. I think once you start to see everything come together in that August presentation, because all these divisions will have their presentations now to talk about that. And as we adopt the 2050 plan, there will be some of that, but it is that push and pull between what we really want to, what do we want to do, what do we have to do, and how do we navigate that just to keep everything moving for the region as well as we can. But it's a really good observation because it is a true dynamic within all of this.
And Chair and Councilmember Carter, you're totally spot on. That's one of the things we talked about earlier in the presentation. The fact is that we're actually doing our forecast for 30 years. Because, we could sit there and we could look at, okay, we have 100 million in 2023, we have 433 million in 2024, and we just move on with our lives. But we're realizing though, we're trying to look at a 30-year plan, a 30-year vision, because there's a lot of things that are happening in the next 30 years. If you want to talk capital maintenance, for example, we're going to be replacing all the blue line vehicles, replacing all the green line vehicles, replacing orange line buses. A lot of major expense coming our way, and that will be the responsibility of the council. So one of the things that we realize is the fact is that we not only have to talk about today, but we have to have a plan, looking forward plan, so that because we'll be bringing that plan back to the Transportation Committee and the council with the finance recommendations saying, this is our forecast of receipts for the next 30 years. These are the things that we need, because we not only have our current commitments that the council has made, because the council is committed to the blue line and the current green line, our current bus system. We have to maintain those assets with the FTA into a state of good repair. So we need to bring back to the council and say, this is what it's going to cost us for the next 30 years.
This is the gotta do's.
These are the gotta do's that we have to do. The other things the 13 items that are laid out by the legislature, these are the things that we have to spend the money on. The gotta do's also. This is how much is left. And then we have to look at those and look at by year and look at, they're going to have peaks and valleys. There will be some things that we'll probably bring recommendations back forward to the council to recommend. We're talking about setting capital dollars aside. Because as you can imagine, if we have to start replacing 50 rail cars, that's a lot of money. We have to start setting the money aside today and tomorrow for that future replacement out in 15 years. So those are all part of the vision that we want to come back to the council and lay those plans out. And that's what we're currently working on.
And like the business item we had, Amy presented on the transportation equity investment project, that was a want to do. That was something that the council knew that we could see that these big investments were happening across the region, and how can we understand and help direct funding as much as we have the capability to do too, but to make sure that that's part of the conversation. So there is that room to do the things that are the more visionary side of things. And that one feels like a numbers one, but yeah, I'm a transportation wonk, so I think that's a big deal. And but yeah, everyone I think we had a lot of great discussions about that, because it was really tying to vision, because there were multiple numbers of projects that were being presented. I think we're getting a present update on it at management committee on Wednesday, so it might be worthwhile to take a look at the presentation of where some of those projects are, to see what's been done historically, and what can we do going forward, because I think our staff's always looking for new ideas.
One more. And I appreciate all of that. I think the strain is always there, in a budgeting process, and particularly when you're thinking not just about 1 year or two, but you're looking down the horizon at what the possibilities are. I also think that the piece that I'm looking for, that I may not see the space for, are options. What are the options that we have, and how will those options be presented? As we understand what we must do, what we want to do, and what becomes a part of our vision, so we're driven to do, there are going to be a lot of choices that we have to make. I don't just envision that we'll see a budget, that shows us everything we're going to do, but that this council will have the opportunity to talk about options and priorities in that space of time before we set a final budget for this year, for next year, and for future years as we think about the planning horizon. So I'm looking not for an answer as to how we address those options right here and right now, but to better understand, how the council will be a part of that iterative process of discussion, prioritization, and action. I leave that at the table for all of us to think about and to actually determine together. Thank you.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I have a specific question, but also in response to Councilmember Tony's questions and things that we should consider. I know we're focusing in on like buckets of money, buckets of revenue, buckets of expenses, and the council will want to know, and I knew that when I started on the council, I wanted to know where are the discretionary funds, and how do we as a council want to prioritize those funds. So if we could lay it out that way, I think that would be very helpful to, distinguish between the gotta-haves and the discretionary funds. And then my question was regarding the metro area sales tax uses on page 15 of the presentation under other investments. Can you elaborate on the active transportation uses and what categories or spending would be involved under active transportation?
Okay, I would look for some help. Charles?
Sure. Madam Chair, council member, happy to offer additional information here. Within the statute, there 5% goes to the Transportation Advisory Board, and Peter Dugan earlier was mentioning this, that it's really at TAB's discretion on what to fund. Traditionally, we think of active transportation as pedestrian and bicycle projects, but it could be broader than that, and in fact, that's some of what TAB was discussing last week. Perhaps that could include operating funds for bike share programs. Perhaps that could include, just new definitions of active transportation uses.
Okay.
Additionally, the council has the option to invest, be separate from the 5% that goes to TAB that must go to active transportation. Active transportation is one of the categories that the council can invest in. So it hasn't been a significant area of funding discretion to the council, but is offered in this program. So it's a new area that we'd be exploring and developing options for as part of the sales tax, and the council's 95% share of the 83% of the sales tax.
And I'll note of the 17%, the counties also have funding in there that is directed to be used as one of the many uses of active transportation and transit. So. Clear as mud.
It is clear as mud.
All right, and just sort of a side note, like I think when it comes to a lot of the discretionary spending, we'll hear more about sort of the pots that are available as we review our regional administration budget. That tends to be where more of that discussion happens. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay, Chair Committee members, if there's no additional
Make
questions.
sure, is there any other questions?
I can move into the Metro Transit family. Okay. First of all, with advancing stronger, better 2023 operations, as we propose the 24 budget, we're continuing to work on our plan. The 24 budget will help us with the critical work of becoming a stronger and better transit agency, as we've been discussing over the last few months. It includes several key initiatives: the Network Now, which is a project through which we are developing a plan to invest in improving our service as more resources become available and more drivers become available. We have our Safety and Security Action Plan, which is comprised of over 40 actions that Metro Transit has taken to improve public safety on our system. And in fact, the Metro Transit staff, I believe, will be coming to the Committee of the Whole on August 2nd for their next quarterly update on the transit safety and security plan. We have the Great Workplace that we have been working at with Metro Transit, focusing on goals on making Metro Transit a great place to work and building a career. It includes many efforts to recruit and retain employees, especially for many of our essential positions. Looking at environmental sustainability, which with continued investment in environmental sustainability initiatives and working with the Council's Climate Action Plan. Throughout all the work, though, with building Stronger, Better 2023, we have 4 core elements that are weaved into this with equity, effective communication, performance evaluation and continuous improvement, and of course, financial stewardship. So before we get into the Metro Transit family, one of the things I want to show this year, just so you get an understanding of the size and breadth of Metro Transit. Metro Transit's total operating budget is about $600 million. Salaries and benefits comprise about $411 million of that, so we are very, as you would anticipate, a very labor-intensive organization. Just over 3,279 proposed FTEs. Very large organization. Breaking it down by the major groups, you can see bus transportation, for example, has just over 1,300. This is the operators, mainly operators, 1,300 FTEs, $174 million. Maintenance, 491. This is all the mechanics and all the people that are doing the work on the buses and the trains, or buses rather. It's 491 FTEs, $109 million. Engineering facility, this is all of our maintaining of our facilities, maintaining on the fleet, maintaining all the shelters, all those types of items. 261 people or $58 million in their budget. The police force is 225 FTEs at $46 million. The finance division, which I am over, we have just over 171 FTEs, a budget of about $35 million. The next big one then would be rail operations. This is Blue and Green Line and North Star together, about $102 million or 488 FTEs. We have our Transit Systems Development Group, which is $21 million. And then all of our other departments, whether it's the TOD office, strategic initiatives, and all the various other departments, executive, they all roll up to about 188 FTEs, 52 million. But bottom line, the Metro Transit family is just over $600 million. So it is a sizable budget. So now I'll break it down between bus. We'll go into the various divisions. Metro Transit bus. As I mentioned, we're planning service levels next year at about 88% of pre-COVID levels. Our base service, we're proposing an increase of about 2.5%, and then we're adding on the additional ABRT lines that we'll be adding during the year. As you would imagine, we have continued robust efforts, we're using the word robust, efforts to hire and retain operators and other support staff, whether it's operators, mechanics, police, all the different people that we need to support our service. We'll be continuing evaluating and reviewing the budget assumptions, looking at travel, looking at ridership demand, and making any changes between now and the public hearing draft. But also, if we see anything that's changing next year, we will come forward in one of our quarterly budget amendments and recommend a change to the budget if we see necessary for the budget. But we'll also be continuing investments in safety and the customer experience. Now with that, for the Metro Transit bus system, that's about a $441 million budget for Metro Transit bus. Once again, I put in parentheses right at the end, to be updated with sales tax and revenues. So once again, the bus budget will change between now and the public hearing draft, but currently today it's at about $441 million. Largest source of revenue, motor vehicle sales tax is 60%. We're planning to use reserves next year of about $93 million. This is a planned use with our multi-year forecast. We have federal dollars in here, about $38 million, 9%. We have fund transfer, that is the motor vehicle sales tax that was up and above the 95% last year. We're bringing forward that in the budget now in '24. We have federal relief money, about $19 million. Then other revenues, about $3.6 million, which is mainly advertising revenue. All the bus side advertising revenue that you see on the buses, about $3.6 million a year. On the expense side, as I mentioned, very, very labor intensive. $326 million for salaries and benefits, about 74% of our budget. If we then had the balance of the budget, would be materials and supplies, all of our utilities, our fuel. Once again, fuel is budgeted at $3.11 a gallon for next year. We have regional allocations for shared services, and then other costs, which would be some advertising costs and various marketing type costs. Once again, it's a $441 million budget that we will be recommending for change between now and public hearing. Capital side, $27 million. This is staff, faculty and staff that are working on capital projects, whether it's Southwest, Blue Line, any of our BRTs that are developing. We recognize their expenses, but you'll see on the revenue side, it's coming from basically federal sources. But we want to recognize them within our overall family of budgets. One of the things that we also talk to the transportation and talk to the council about is we look at how the budgets are doing compared to the prior year. Are they increasing, decreasing, and or why? One of the first comparisons that we do is we actually compare it to our base percentage. Within our multi-year forecast, we have historically used a base inflation percentage of 3.15%. So that is our base base inflation, so then we're identifying anything that is above 3.15%, trying to identify what happened. So first of all, our budget right now is proposed at $441 million. The budget in '23 is $410. So it's an increase of about $31 million or 7.6%. So the adjustments above the 3.15% are about $18 million. So those are mainly coming from adjustments that we have either from our rates from human resources for salaries and benefits and or service increases going from the 80 to 82.5%. We have fuel. Fuel is actually going up 27% between 2023 and 2024. Our rate in 2023 is $2.44 a gallon. The fuel forward pricing rate, and now in 2024 is $3.11 a gallon, so it went up 27%. We also have a significant increase in parts, not only due to the additional miles for the additional service increase, but also due to the computerization and those types of items. And then we also then have an adjustment on the regional allocations. This is mainly on technology costs to support the various systems that Metro Transit has. It's all of our maintenance contracts that we have on technology and or additional technology services we need to maintain our systems. Then we go into light rail. Now this is consolidated both blue line and green line together. As I mentioned earlier, we are currently running a 15-minute frequency on the blue and the green line, proposing to bring that back to a 10-minute frequency in 2024, once again dependent upon hiring. We also have the significant increases in the parts, 10 to 12% on parts, mainly due to computerizations, items that we're noticing, and also then utilities due to increased inflation. We also have, as we've been talking about over the last few years, structure maintenance, making sure we can maintain our assets, our stations, all of our platforms, shelters, et cetera, into a state of good repair. We have those costs. But the other big change that we're making is we're bringing in the Metropolitan Transportation Sales Tax and replacing the county's contribution. The light rail system, it's a $108 million budget. It's basically almost split 50-50 blue and green. So that kind of gives you a frame of reference. The revenue sources look a little different than the bus. We have state funding, motor vehicle sales taxes on the bus side. You see state funding on the rail side, which is state appropriations. Then we have fares collecting about 13%, use of reserves, all other, once again, would be advertising. You'll see use of sales tax, $40 million. That's replacing the county's contribution with the sales tax. And then we have the federal relief funds, which is offsetting the revenue decline on ridership. And then on the expense side, it's $108 million. Somewhat similar to the bus side, very labor intensive, 51% of our budget on the rail system, salaries and benefits. Instead of diesel fuel, we have propulsion. You have our utility costs, our shared services from regional allocations, materials and supplies, modal allocations, about 18% of the budget or 19%. The biggest piece of that would be police, because we recognize the police in the bus division, and then we allocate the costs over to the light rail and the commuter rail. So this would be a light rail's portion of our police budget of about $19 million. Commuter rail, like I mentioned, we are planning 8 trips per weekday and special event service next year. We're continuing to evaluate that service, look at ridership demand, and we'll be ready to adjust if necessary. They have the same challenges that light rail has, increase in parts, increase in utilities. We also have the structural maintenance. The commuter rail started in 2009, so we're running some of the similar challenges that we do have on the light rail, maintaining our shelter. So platforms, all those types of items in a state of good repair. We have those costs built in, but also then the last bullet point is we're removing the Hennepin and the Anoka County funding and replacing that with the new transportation sales tax. The commuter rail budget, it's just over an $18 million budget. It's similar to the light rail. We have our state funds, which are state appropriations. You have the fares in of $500,000. Planned use of reserves, sales tax, which is $6.4 million, which would be replacing Anoka County and Hennepin County. Then you have Sherburne County and Greater Minnesota in at $1.2 million, and the use of federal funds of $2.9 million to offset the revenue decline on ridership. Expenses, similar to everybody else, salaries and benefits, all the other costs. The big change you'll see here is BNSF. With the North Star commuter rail line, Once the train gets on the track to get onto the BNSF line, BNSF staff take the train over. They get on the tail track, get onto the BNSF right away. BNSF then operates the train until it gets back to the Big Lake facility, pulls off on the tail track, then our staff will then get on and bring it into the barn. So that's about a planned expenditure, about $3.3 million in 2024. So overall, the full rail budget, which is both light rail, Blue Green, and North Star, is about $127 million. Our light rail has seen about a 6.4% increase, $108 million in '24 compared to $102 million in 2023. Above the 3.15%, it's about $3.3 million. That's a combination of going to the dish. The biggest piece of that is going to the 10-minute frequency and some labor adjustments, but the biggest piece of that is going from a 15 to a 10-minute frequency. North Star is about a 4.4% increase, $18.6 million in '24 versus $17.8 in '23. It's about $200,000 above the 3.15%. That's mainly some wage adjustments and fuel. So they're pretty close, but the light rail, the biggest piece would be the service frequency increase going from the 15 to the 10-minute frequency. And with that, Chair and committee members, that is the Metro Transit family, and I would stand for questions on that.
Councilmember Vento.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just so I've got this straight in my head. The federal relief dollars that you have on the revenue side for Met Transit bus and for the Metro Light Rail, those are dollars that will go away at the end of 2024?
Yeah, Chair and committee members, our forecast right now is we are going to spend those funds through 2024. That's correct.
And so when they're gone, how do we anticipate making up those dollars in future budgets?
Chair and committee members?
Is that ridership increases?
Chair and committee members, part of it would be ridership increases, but also part of it is then the Metropolitan Transportation sales tax.
Got it.
So there's a beauty in the mix
Got it.
here.
Okay.
And if I could, Madam Chair, just to emphasize that for the council members, we've talked about the structural deficit, the fiscal cliff that's been approaching, and as Ed said earlier, the federal funds kind of pushed that off when otherwise it would have hit in 2021. It's important to know that when we see the large revenue associated with the sales tax, we have to remember that a lot of that, a significant portion of that, is filling a hole in the operating budget every year. It's not new money. Thankfully there isn't a cliff anymore, but it's not new money.
Yeah.
And then there's replacing the county, what are currently county contributions in the operating budget for the LRT and BRT operations. So we'll continue to bring you more information about this, but that's where the sales tax has come in at such an important time to provide stability and adequate funding for operations.
Thank you.
Additional questions or comments? It's been a long meeting. We still got a little more, but if you have questions
you
to
have
follow up
Heather.
later, yeah, we're gonna now turn it to Heather.
Sounds good. So we'll transition over to Metropolitan Transportation Services now. Just as a quick reminder, that's Metro Mobility, contracted fixed route, Transit Link, Metro Van Pool, and planning. And we'll talk about these programs separately, similar to how the Metro Transit family of services were discussed. So the preliminary budget is based on current service levels and has been updated with contractor rates and fuel prices. So the fixed route 2024 budget represents 100% of service operating in May 2023 with an hourly rate inflated by 4% annually. So service has been increasing since May, so we do anticipate that expenses will continue to rise as well. Metro Mobility service levels are programmed at 100%. Metro Mobility ridership was at about 82% of pre-COVID levels in 2022, so our budgeted ridership and vehicle revenue hours have been are down slightly in the budget to reflect the actuals that we were seeing in the prior year. So we'll continue to monitor those numbers, and that's the type of thing that may change between now and the public comment budget. We continue to have COVID impacts on operations that's mostly reflected in ridership, and then increased costs in some areas, primarily transit provider contract rates in the preliminary budget are then being offset by some lower budgeted general expenses, but we've been able to hold pretty level with some lower premium on demand service costs. That's same day taxi service, and then Metro Mobility ADA service and vehicle revenue hours. But I'll talk a little bit more about each of those in the individual service slides. And then we're continuing to look at Metro Mobility. Ed had mentioned this earlier, but Metro Mobility transitioning to a state forecasted program. So this will not impact the 2024 budget, but it's important, and so we'll continue to keep talking about it throughout these conversations and into the next year as we enter state fiscal year 2026. And then we are also working on our zero emission fleet plan. So this is a really high level of our contracted services budget. Metro Mobility is showing a 3% increase over last year. So 105.3 million compared to 102.6 million in 2023. This assumes a gas price this year of $3.46, which is down from $3.98 that was in the budget in 2023. So that's a 22% decrease. And then just to note, for every 25-cent increase in fuel prices, we add about $900,000 in fuel costs. So we'll continue to keep an eye on those dollar amounts and adjust as necessary before the public comment and the adopted versions of the budget. Bus and van pool are showing an increase about 10% over last year. This is being driven primarily by higher provider expenditures, higher contract rates, and increased hours. And then additionally, we're hoping to reinstate a decent number of suspended services over the next 12 months. And then you can also see there that we're assuming diesel costs at $3.64 a gallon, which is down from $3.87 in the 2023 budget. And then Transit Link is up 15%, again, a result of higher provider expenditures. And the gas price remains the same across those three. So diving into a little bit more detail on the services, Metro Mobility here. Most general and overhead expenses have been flat to 2023. The main story in MTS Transit Services is ridership, service levels, and fuel costs. So preliminary budgets were based on current service levels and the updated contract and fuel prices. A little bit more detail on MetMo. So again, the preliminary budget is just over 105 million. This is made up primarily of state general fund appropriations. So a couple of years ago, the legislature split the council appropriations, so there's a defined appropriation for Metro Mobility, and then the rest goes to transit. I believe it's rail.
Yep.
You can also see there is about $35 million in federal funding in the METMO budget. 32 million of that is the last remaining COVID relief funding, the CRISA funding, and then 3 million is from DHS for agency waiver services. And then we have about $7 million in fares. Again, that's projected at 100%, but we've been around 82%, I think, was our 2022 ridership. So we'll continue to track what that looks like. Planned use of reserves at $4.6 million. And then on the expense side, one of the big things that you're going to see looking different between MTS and Metro Transit is the salary and benefits. So the biggest piece of the pie for contracted services is in the transit provider expenses. So those are, we issue RFPs and then bring those to council for adoption. And then So yeah, that's the money that we're spending on the contractors who provide the services. Fuels and materials at about $12 million. And then just to note, so just over 90% of our budget for Metro Mobility is direct service, so the service and the fuel. And then $3 million in RA allocations. Ed touched on that earlier, so same things with HR and general counsel and communications and RA finance and all those folks. Let's see, so we've got about 3% for council salary and staff, $2.5 million for contracted services, and then $400,000, about 1% of the budget for all other expenses. Moving on to contracted bus, transit link, and van pool. So here we shift away from the state general fund appropriation, and this is primarily funded through motor vehicle sales tax. $29 million in motor vehicle sales tax, $1.4 million in fares, $1 million in federal money. This is money that comes to the council or MTS from MnDOT through their 5311 rural service, so providing grants there. Again, budget is very similar to Metro Mobility. 90% of the budget is for transit provider expenses. 1.1 million, just about 1.1% is for salary and benefits. And then the rest of it is 5% of our budget, so RA allocation, contracted services, and other expenses. Just to note for fixed route, there's some higher expenditures, about 9.2% or $1.8 million increase over 2023 due to higher contracted rates and increased hours. And then I had again mentioned earlier that we're hoping to reinstate some suspended routes over the next 12 months. For van pool, we're anticipating modest growth in 2024. There are currently 52 van pools. Budgeted in 2024, we have 57 vans. And then also, as mentioned earlier, Transit Link is continuing to see higher provider expenditures, so it's up about 16% over the 2023 amount. And then of the $1.4 million increase, $1 million was specifically for microtransit. So planning, moving on to planning, some of the highlights in that area are implementing Thrive MSP 2040 and then working with other divisions on the 2050 Regional Development Guide and the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan, beginning the regional solicitation evaluation to prepare for 2026 solicitation. I believe this was a project that was highlighted last year in this presentation. And then some new and continued planning studies, regional safety action plan, the equity evaluation of transportation investment, electric vehicle public charging needs, metropolitan housing or highway system harms, impacts and mitigation priorities, microtransit policy framework, and then other ongoing studies. So the, excuse me, so the planning budget, we see a 1% decrease, so 10.8 million in 2024 compared to 10.9 million in 2023. This is up to, it's up $500,000 in federal revenue because of the higher consolidated planning grant. But spending is down as a result of less planned travel behavior inventory spending in 2024. And then just backing up a little bit, of that $500,000 in the of the $500,000 that's bid as part of the consolidated planning grants, the increase 0.4 of that is unspent funds that were carried forward from 2023. For the pass-through budget, so we pass through funding to the regional suburban providers, as was touched on earlier. That's MVTA, Southwest Transit, City of Plymouth and the City of Maple Grove, and then also other regional providers, primarily the University of Minnesota. So we're seeing a 3% decrease in our pass-through budget. This is driven by a delay in projects for Southwest Transit. One of them is a result of delays in procuring buses, so the service won't be able to start as early as was originally anticipated. And then the other one was a project that they are aligning with the opening of, it's a mobility hub, and they were aligning it with the opening of the Southwest Light Rail extension, and so that one has been further delayed as well. So the pass-through is made up of two different things. So first, there's the federal operating dollars that are programmed here. Those are competitive awards that are made either via the regional solicitation or ones that the suburban transit providers apply for on their own, and they come to the council and then are passed through via grant agreements. The second component here is motor vehicle sales tax, which we pass through to all providers based on an established state allocation funding policy, so it's all formula. That allocation did change during legislation, during the legislative session. So the amounts that you see here are preliminary and will be updated as we receive new forecasts from the state. Like Ed mentioned, that's kind of the last thing we plug in November after the November forecast. So those are pass-through. And then, so planning, operating, and revenue and expense, pretty simple. So we have federal dollars that we bring in, just over $6 million, about $4.3 million in motor vehicle sales tax. Much of that is to match the federal funds. The expense side is also pretty straightforward, so contains some divisional administrative expenses. For example, Charles is paid out of the budget, my salary is paid out of the budget, and then some of the grant staff that you sometimes see before you are out of that budget. So the people and the work that we do is charged to that. You'll also see consultant studies and the deliverables coming out of those. So we hire consultants to help us execute a lot of the work that we do, just with a number of regional demands and the level of subject matter expertise that is required for those. It gives us a lot of flexibility without having to build that capacity in-house. And then finally, there is $2.4 million in regional allocation costs, which Ed and I have already talked about. So that wraps up my MTS slides, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And thank you. Any questions or comments? Everyone's overloaded. That is fine. I do appreciate everyone sticking around. I know it's a lot, but I wouldn't normally keep going this long, but I think it's really important to get all of this in one sort of fell swoop and then be able to get into detailed questions as we go. If you have questions as you're processing all of this, Heather and Ed are very accessible and be happy to answer questions or walk through any of the more detailed things that you really need. One last call, any questions?
There won't be a test, will there?
There will not, and definitely not tonight. So we're good to go for this evening. All right, thank you all. Appreciate it, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you very much.